Recording in progress.
Okay. All right.
Recording in progress? Oh.
It didn't say.
Nothing. You're good to go.
Are we good to go then?
Yep.
Okay, we're going to call to order the meeting of the Provo Municipal Council work session. Today is Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023. The time is now 1:03 p.m. We will do the roll call going around the room. Our counselors that we have are Travis Hoban, George Handley, myself, Rachel Whipple, Dave Shipley, and do we have anyone online right now?
No, Shannon.
Okay,
Shannon's
and we
fine.
have Shannon Ellsworth online. Patrice McKay is excused, and Bill Fillmore may be joining us later. Until he is able to join us, he is also excused. Hey, and all right. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called upon by the council chair. When speaking, please be sure to use a microphone so that the record is clear and those attending virtually can hear you. Please also be sure to limit side conversations as they interfere with the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, please step out of the work meeting room. Okay, it is proposed that we approve the following minutes: the August 22nd, 23 council meeting and the September 19th, 23 Board of Canvassers meeting. Are there any objections or requested changes? Seeing no objection, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Okay, our first item of council business is an update regarding the Provo River Delta Project. This will be presented by Michael Mills, Executive Director of the Utah Reclamation Mitigation Conservation Commission. You're Mills.
Best to go up front? Or?
Yes, but either way, we need you at a microphone.
Okay.
In fact, anytime anybody else pops up to answer a question, please go to a microphone. Thank you.
All right, well, we sure are happy to be here and have this opportunity to update you all on this project that's been going on out on the west side of Provo now for a number of years. But before I get started, I'd like to introduce Melissa Stamp. Melissa is our projects manager with the Mitigation Commission, and she has been involved with the Delta project since even before the first scoop of dirt, with the design and all of the planning to make sure this project got rolling, and then was the project coordinator that oversaw the Delta for a number of years. And then we also have Eric McCauley, who is a project coordinator with our agency, and Eric handles a lot of the day-to-day items with the Delta project and coordination with the construction crew and other issues that can crop up down there on the Delta. So we were here a year ago. Can I use this to it? Perfect. Okay. About a year ago, and just provided an update of how things were going down there on the Delta, and we wanted to come back and give everyone another update. We made some good progress this year and want to share that with all of you. So I'm going to go over some of the features of the Delta, what we've accomplished since the last time we were here, and then focus a little bit on the original Provo River Channel, that segment that's left from below where we diverted the river out into the Delta itself. And then cover a little bit of the outreach activities we've had going on and recreational aspects of the project, and then finish by covering some of the coordination we've had with city staff and others. So just a quick overview. I think you probably are all pretty familiar with where the Delta is, but Utah Lake State Park over here on the side, the original Provo River, right here just north of Center Street. And then of course our project is just under 300 acres located out there to the north of Bow Harbor Drive and to the west of Lakeview Parkway. So just a reminder, this project was initiated and is part of the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program. One of the key reasons we did the project or started it was in order to create nursery and rearing habitat for young June sucker. When we started the project, June sucker were technically an endangered species, although the process to upgrade them to threatened status was well underway. And we reached a point through a captive rearing and stocking program where we have tens of thousands of June sucker out in the lake, and we have thousands and thousands that would come up the Provo River to spawn and produce millions of larval fish. But the issue was the habitat in the old Provo River was such that either those fish would starve, fall out of the water column, or just generally not reach Utah Lake or be attacked by predators. And so we weren't getting any recruitment from these millions of larval fish that were hatching out in the Provo River each year. The project up on the screen down in the corner is actually the Hobble Creek Restoration Project that was done in 2009. And this was used somewhat as a model for the Delta project, because prior to the Delta, this had really been the only place where we had seen larval fish survive that first year and start to grow up to become adults on their own. So these three depictions kind of show the varying nature of the Delta. It's very much the look and function is very much dependent on water levels in Utah Lake and also water levels in the Provo River. So over on the left-hand side, we have conditions that are typical of a dry spring, where the lake is low and the river is flowing at what is kind of a minimal spring runoff peak of about 500 cubic feet per second. And then in the middle is really typical of a higher lake level and then a wet spring. And it's actually really kind of what we saw this year. So as part of the project, we lowered the Skipper Bay dike and allow Utah Lake water to come in and inundate what was historically Skipper Bay, a part of Utah Lake. So in this middle diagram, the lake is at compromise level, often considered full, the 4489. And then the river is modeled at flowing at just over 1400 CFS, or just under 1500 CFS. And we almost got to these exact conditions this spring, with the lake coming up, not quite hitting compromise level, and then the river flowing at almost 2000 cubic feet per second. And then the far example is really kind of a typical summer with a low lake. You see a lot more visible terrestrial land there, and then the river flowing at about 40 cubic feet per second, which is what we anticipate to be kind of a dry year scenario here moving forward. Wanted to show an overview of this. We've been taking these aerial photos every November, and in PowerPoint, I actually have the 2021 or 2020, 2021, 2022 slide showing up in animation. But you can see that as we started the project, all the work was over on the west side, and then just building channels back and the different ponds and riparian mounds. So about a year ago, we had much of the Delta constructed and just had to finish up the river channel coming back towards Lakeview Parkway and then connecting back into the Provo River. And so from November 2022 until March of 2023, that was really our focus, was building that channel and making this connection. So this was March 2nd down on the river, and this turned out to be really a great event. We kind of opened it up to anyone that was interested in coming. We estimated about 300 people that were in attendance. I know some of you were even down there for that fun day. It was really great to see this connection made and to see the Delta start to fill with water. This a lot of memories looking back at that photo. Kind of a culmination of a lot of work that a lot of people have put in to get to this point. And then from that point forward, we had even more work to do. This is a picture that was sent to me. Someone took this out of the window of an airplane as they were flying into Salt Lake over Utah Lake. But this was the first picture I saw that shows the delta completely full, and you can even see the different colored water coming in over the Skipper Bay Dike as it shows up there in Utah Lake. That everyone probably remembers the high levels of snowpack that we had this spring and the concerns about flooding, and the delta wasn't left out of that at all. Our construction process was to build this channel and then go back and build some of the control structures to keep the water where we intended it to be. And so we made a mad rush starting after we diverted the river to build 2 berms along what used to be Boat Harbor Drive and the south side of the river. A lot of coordination with the City Public Works Department to make sure we were addressing concerns and that we weren't going to cause flooding issues somewhere else on the river. And then additionally, the south border of our project is intended to be another berm. We call it the South Delta berm, and a lot of work went into that. We had a little bit more time to deal with that as the lake didn't come up quite as fast as the river did. It was a very busy time all the way really through June in monitoring river flows and making sure we were addressing everything. And then in terms of fish response, we were really pleased with what we found. One of the concerns that we didn't really think would be a big deal, that there was a concern that June sucker wouldn't be able to find the new Provo River. And they did find it. We worked with the Division of Wildlife Resources to monitor the spawning run again this year, and over 6,000 tagged June sucker entered the Delta area. And so a portion of the fish have a tag that gets recorded when they swim over a remote monitoring antenna. So 6,000, that probably represents somewhere between 20 to 30% of the entire June sucker use down on the Delta. And then we captured larval suckers, but it's not really anything new. We've always had larval suckers in the Provo River from the spawning run. And then subsequently to that, we have found juvenile suckers out in the Delta as well. So it's the first year. There's still a lot that has to play out and a lot that we still have to learn. But so far, we're seeing June sucker use, seeing spawning, and seeing little fish out in the Delta itself. So some of the highlights of this year's construction. Since June, we've really been focused on the old channel. So if you remember the conditions of the old channel going forward, we're going to continue to provide 10 cubic feet per second of water into that channel. And then in order to stabilize elevations to support recreation and other activities down there, we're building a small dam down near Utah Lake State Park. And so that old channel essentially becomes a long linear pond. And in the future will be managed as a community fishery by the state. And so some of our plans for this call for the installation of fishing platforms and some other amenities. We've been pretty good at delivering the 10 cubic feet per second. As we made this transition, there were some issues with our diversion and being able to provide that flow and keeping everything clean. So it was flowing, but by and large, since about the middle of July, we've had 10 CFS flowing through that little channel. I mentioned our focus on the South Delta berm. That will eventually become a trail. And then we've also began some work on the existing channel in the form of downsizing the upper part to make it more of an amenity And then we also installed an aeration system that we'll talk about more. So some of the recreational highlights, in addition to the pedestrian trail that's going on top of the berm, from early on, we've included plans for a non-paved equestrian trail. It's kind of offset to the side of the pedestrian trail. And we'll see, you know, sometimes I wonder how many people are going to take their horses down there, but we're providing that opportunity. I know in other areas where they provided a non-paved trail, they actually get more people running on that trail because it's lower impact than horse use. We're working now on plans for the viewing tower that is going to be there kind of close to the old Skipper Bay Dike, and then working on trailheads and other recreational amenities. Too far. So some of the fishing platforms, non-motorized boat launches are kind of depicted here. We've adjusted some of these locations based on feedback from some of the stakeholders down there. Rather than having a fishing platform at Alligator Park, that's going to become down closer to the RV park here. Really, Lakeview Parkway kind of becomes a delineator between a smaller channel upstream of that road and then more of this pond-like feature downstream from there. And then up in the circle there, that is where we're working with the city to build what will be called Delta Gateway Park. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in a minute. But that area where that circle is really becomes kind of a trail hub as the Provo River Parkway Trail will take off from there and continue upstream as it does now. There's the trail out along Lakeview Parkway that you can access there, and also the trail that will head out to the Delta is also in that location, and that will loop around and connect back in with the Provo River down near Utah Lake State Park. I mentioned the aeration system. This year it was really intended as a pilot project to see what it would take to continuously aerate the lower river. And so we installed two systems. One is up right next to Lakeview Parkway, and the other one is down by the RV park. Different technologies for us to get an idea of what would work better, how frequent they needed to be turned on. And then we've been monitoring dissolved oxygen and other water channel to be a resource, to be an amenity. And we went through our public meetings and our planning process. When people made it very well known that they cared about this section of the river, and with the trail being right there, that they didn't want this to be abandoned. And so we've gone above and beyond to make sure we're taking care of this and addressing those concerns. It is a little more difficult because this is managed by Utah County. And so our ability and authority to work in this is a little bit limited. And so we're trying to bring all the partners together to do positive things down there. So far, we know we can provide the water, we know we can aerate, and then over the next year, we're planning to build a lot of the recreational features that we've been talking about down there. Delta Gateway Park, just another view of, yeah.
It's very artistic.
Yeah,
Right?
it's like washed out or something. Yeah, not the best view of Delta Gateway Park. But this is located up off of Lakeshore Drive, across the river from the Lakeshore Drive trailhead. And we actually worked with the city, and I think it's been 3 years ago since we came up with the final design, that we funded that design work through the Parks Department, and then Blue Line Design came up with really nature-themed park, the playground, bunch of the facilities down there are really centered around kind of a river or nature theme. There'll be ample parking here, a restroom, and this will be kind of the gateway point to that trail hub that I was talking about. Kind of a popularized or a not often mentioned aspect of the restoration project is the amount of revegetation work. And so each fall, we've been going out not only with seeds, but also with hand planting of shrubs and other plants out there on the Delta. Eric corrected me, this year will actually be 90,000 plants that we'll be putting out there on the Delta. We have to do this, and it had to be a thing from year one because it would be awfully daunting to go back now and try to repeat this effort over the whole Delta. And then what you don't see here is also the weed control that has to take place to combat invasion of Phragmites or other invasive plants as we're going through the restoration process. So a quick slide, kind of on the schedule. You can see how far we've come with, 2020, we're building an access road and really working with Dominion Energy to bury a gas line even deeper than it was, all the way to where we're moving into 2024. We're finishing up the small dam on the lower river, finishing up the diversion structure, and then really focusing on a lot of these recreational features that will be built through 2024 with the goal of probably opening to the public. We've always targeted 2024 as the completion, but it's going to be late 2024. I want that message to be clear that it's not going to be in the spring or summer. We're looking at least a year from now before we're ready to open it up and welcome the public down there. Some of the outreach activities that we have going on, we have a website that's updated about monthly. We have a newsletter that comes out twice a year. If you don't receive that, we would love to have you added to that list. We try not to spam people. It's just a spring issue and then a fall issue. It's a very popular area, as you all know, and we've had a lot of demand for people wanting to get out and see it. And so we've hosted so many trips down there. I think Eric is probably doing a couple a week. We've worked closely with Provo High School. We have a class that has been doing some volunteer projects down there. And then additionally, the second Saturday of each month, although in October it will be the third Saturday, we've been hosting a public tour and also some type of volunteer event. So that's coming up here on October 21st. We've also, over the span of the entire project, have been meeting with a group of recreation stakeholders, and we'll be meeting with them again next week to help finalize the designs of the fishing platforms, non-motorized boat ramps, those types of aspects. We've enjoyed working with Provo City. We've got a lot of help, especially from Wayne Parker. I know that he's now retired and moved on, but he kind of became our go-to guy in trying to get a lot of these agreements done. We had a funding agreement in place to help pay for Lakeview Parkway. It's really been a symbiotic relationship. A lot of the excavated material from the Delta was hauled to the regional sports park. That meant the park didn't need to buy material, and we didn't have to haul or haul material as far. We have an agreement with the airport where we are funding part of a wildlife biologist position there to help deal with any potential aircraft hazard mitigation involving birds. We've really appreciated being able to work so closely with the city in getting this project as far along as it is, and really will be a partner here moving forward also. This,
Yeah.
yeah,
Could I just ask a question about the birds?
yeah.
So I know that's been a conversation and a concern for a long time, but I feel like it's been a long time since I've heard more about it, especially since the expansion of the airport and the proposed expansion of the airport. Are there, are there concerns on the horizon that there's a limit to how big the airport can be, or is that not relevant? It's either you either function as an airport or not, based on the current bird population.
Yeah, I probably can't speak to what the concerns are in terms of airport expansion moving forward. But this year, with the diversion of the water into the Delta, this was kind of seen as our first full operation year. So the wildlife biologist, Mason Saltmeyer, who was an employee of Wildlife Services, he started work this spring. And so a lot of his is focused on identifying potential bird problems down there and then going out and trying to address them. To date, he hasn't had to go out to the Delta itself to do any hazing of birds. That's all really been focused on the airport. And then we're still learning so much. So we contract with Randy Larson at BYU, and he employs several students to monitor birds down in Utah Lake. And it really expands beyond the Delta, even down through the airport and down through Provo Bay. And we're now in year 7 of this bird monitoring program. So we wanted to establish a solid data set of what bird activity was prior to the Delta being built, through the construction season, and then post Delta. It's interesting that the biggest change was when they dredged Utah Lake State Park Marina. Trying that out and doing all that work has brought in so many birds to the state park that as you look at the data, what was going on in 2017? And it was the dredging of the marina. I think it's probably too soon to say in terms of how bird activity has changed. The one thing that does seem apparent is that rather than birds being at Utah Lake State Park and at the Provo River, they seem to be more up at the Delta. That seems to be a change, but in terms of numbers at the airport, that seems to have been pretty constant. Thanks.
I'd like to recognize that Isaac Thompson, our deputy mayor, has joined us, and you have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll go ahead and just finish this quickly. Just trying to get an idea of different agreements that we've negotiated with the city. The one we're working on now, which will probably be one of the last, is a boundary line adjustment and license agreement to allow the city to go in and maintain the Despain drain as a stormwater kind of drainage facility. The project touches on a lot of objectives from a lot of different plans. And so there's a lot of different partners that are involved. And then this an aerial view from June of the Delta. When we were building this, I never dreamed of it being completely full, especially so quickly. And so to have conditions like this in year 1, it's been challenging for sure. And there are some repairs we have to make because of the high water, but it sure looks nice to have it full of water. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, so counselors, do you have questions?
Great work.
All right, Mr. Shipley.
Just wonder if the flooding setback the project in any material way, if timing or anything like that was. I mean, we're glad that it, had the water we did, obviously, but I realize it probably cost a lot of stress.
Yeah.
For a new project, so.
You want to touch on that, Eric? Maybe some of the repairs we have to make and.
I will say thank you for the audience today. there were really no major damage from the flooding. You know, it was kind of amazing. We sort of got out of the way and the floods came and we were watching. We had a couple places where the river came under Lakeview Parkway and then made a turn, that we had some of our banks that kind of got eroded. We've just fixed that. It made a nice deep hole. I bet there'll be the swimming hole for the kids in the future, but really no major damage. And it moved a little bit of the material around and redistributed it in a more natural pattern, which was good because we used heavy equipment to distribute everything and it didn't look as natural, but now it looks a lot more natural. And where it goes from 1 river channel to 2 to 4, it looks really natural now. With the plants we're putting in this fall, we have a lot of area to cover, but we have a lot of plants to put in. So no major damage. And, you know, now we can go ahead and watch it change over time.
Just as a follow-up to that, did the water levels, I mean, did you all expect the sucker to do okay? I mean, my understanding was it needed to be shallow enough to reach water temperatures that were warm enough to really be right for that. And if it was deeper than we expected and a lot more than we expected, were you surprised that the sucker seemed to do well this last spring?
So the sucker this year, you know, they found the river, which was good. They went up, they spawned, and then they hatched out as larvae. The future is when we'll find the answer to that question, which is, are those larvae going to survive to adults? Because that's the critical life cycle that was lost. Is the going from little larva to juvenile. We think, well, and then with the variety of landforms out there, there's always going to be some shallow water areas. When the lake is really low, it'll be just around the edges of the channels, which are about 6 feet deep, and then some backwaters that were created. But in general, it was set up to have a variety of different landforms, and whatever lake level and flows, there will be places for the juvenile June sucker to grow. Right. Thanks.
Have you had much problem with people trespassing in the area? I have restrained myself and not taking my kayak out yet, and it's been hard.
It has been a concern. You know, we advertised putting the water in there. We've advertised the Delta, invited people down there. We wanted people to know about it. And so that has meant people wanting to get out there and see it. And so especially on the weekends, we have a lot of people that are accessing it. Our concern has been from one, public safety. Now we do have heavy equipment down there and we don't want someone to get hurt or a construction operator to, you know, do something that's going to cause any personal injury. So we've tried to beef up security, get the word out that it's not open. I think that's going to be a challenge for us, you know, really until the project is done. And people follow rivers and you get down there and it goes out to the Delta. I don't want to minimize it, and we always try to get the message out that it's not safe to be out there. But we're trying to address it as we can.
So fall 2024, you think?
That's our guess. Do you want to wager or give an estimate, Melissa, or? The microphone on, yeah.
Get prepared.
I'll talk.
Well, we need you to, for the recording.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, that's good enough. Yeah, I don't really have much more to add than I think in a year from now, we'll be able to open. We have a lot to still finish. You probably could see in our schedule, there were kind of fewer text boxes earlier in the project. And now it's like 6 things that are kind of happening at the same time. And so that has all been challenging to coordinate and kind of keep on track, but we just keep punching away at it. And I think we'll be able to be done a year from now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Are there any last questions or comments from Michael? No? All right. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, we will now move on to a discussion regarding an ordinance amending Provo City Code Chapter 14.33A regarding limits of disturbance and clustering requirements in the Critical Hillside Overlay Zone. This has citywide application, and it will be presented by Dustin Wright, one of our city planners. Welcome, Dustin.
Thank you. And so this item is one that, slides. So it's one where a few years ago, the city adopted the Critical Hillside Overlay Zone. And it's applicable in these areas here that are highlighted with that hatched marking, indicating the areas along our hillside where this overlay zone applies. And so recently we saw a need to kind of come back to the text amendment and do some updates to help clarify some items there. So here is an overview of what we're looking at to clarify and clean up in this text amendment here. The first would be, so in a critical hillside zone or overlay zone, we have what are called the limit of disturbance, so an area where a developer would be able to develop on the land. So the text amendment updates the definition for the limit of disturbance to make sure that it's applying to the whole development and not just to a specific parcel or lot in the development. The second part of that is in the disturbance area, just kind of adding some clarifications there and adding a 10% additional 10% for landscaping. So someone can have a garden or something that's not native to the area. And then the next part of it would be
Dustin, can I ask a question? Sure. Just to make sure I'm understanding the language and the concept here, that first bullet point. So in the past, if a developer has a parcel that has 35 lots, you've been working with the assumption that the limits of disturbance percentage apply to each individual lot and not to the collective project.
Yeah, so the language in there for the limit of disturbance, that 40%, it says currently that it's 40% of a lot of a parcel. So we're changing that language to strike that out and be 40% of a development, so of a larger area.
Okay.
Or you could argue, what if you want a parcel, that mean the whole parcel or the subdivided lot? We're trying to clarify that point. That we mean the entire development parcel, and we also mean subdivided lots. So we're trying to clarify what wasn't.
Yeah. And but as I understand it, you're also suggesting that this gives you greater capacity to preserve more open space because you can cluster better.
Yes, that's the intention of this.
Okay.
And then, so the next part gets into the clustering section of the Critical Hillside Zone. And so that section we added that 25% of the proposed development would be preserved as open natural space. So we've added that language. And then we've adjusted the language as far as density bonuses go when you're clustering, so that it currently allowed 50% for agricultural zones to have a 50% base density bonus. We felt like that was probably a bit excessive due to the fact that there's already quite a bit of undevelopable 30% slope areas up there, and so giving bonus density on top of that seemed like a bit much. So the new ordinance amendment has a 25% base density when they meet the requirements in the Critical Hillside Zone to be able to increase that if they're clustering their development, preserving more open space. So that's essentially what we're looking at with this text amendment. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
We have any questions? It sounds like George has already asked our question for today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to item 3, a discussion regarding chapter 17 code changes for hillside excavation administrative citations. This should be presented by Gordon Haig, our city engineer.
Thank you. About a year ago, the mayor set up this hillside task force as a result of the number of violations that had been accumulating of people digging illegally up the mountain. And since that time, we've been addressing a number of issues, including the idea of changing some of our code that'll make it easier to kind of address some of these concerns. I think Bill brought an ordinance to you about 3 or 4 months ago about if a certain property had a violation, you couldn't get another permit. And so that was the start. This is a follow-up, additional ordinances, and the task force will continue to look at other ordinances as they need to be adjusted. So in this particular ordinance, let's see if we can bring up the changes that were here. Right now in our code, chapter 17, if somebody makes a hillside violation by digging, the most that we can charge is $25. And you don't feel like that's
Sorry, I'm laughing out loud at that number.
Yeah.
we didn't feel like that was a
Jaywalking is
number.
worse.
It might have been the pioneers first arrived in the valley, and so we think there was an appropriate time for that. And so there's, we can go through and read it, but basically it increases it to $1,000 per violation, which we feel is a little more meaningful and represents, I think, what the city would like to see in terms of valuing the hillside. And the purpose of today's meeting is just to show you the ordinance, get familiar with it, and I'd like to bring this back to you in your next regular city council to adopt. So that's the purpose of this, just to answer any questions about this ordinance.
Well, I guess the obvious question is, well, maybe it's obvious that I don't need to ask the question, but you assume that 1,000 is enough, right? I mean, you feel like it has enough teeth to, I don't really have any sense at all of what's.
That's a great question. That's a yes and no question. Part of the issue was we have our legal team here, but there's an amount we can't go above with misdemeanor kind of. So this is what our legal folks felt was the max we could go to. So if we thought we could go to a higher max, we may have brought you a little higher number, but this is what we thought we could get.
And you can't increase from the first offense to the second one. So you're just going with the maximum amount in the first offense.
Yes.
If they do it again, they still get the maximum amount.
We didn't. That's the recommendation of the committee, and that's what we're bringing to you. We're trying to give a little more teeth and a little more. We want to catch somebody's attention. I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, Isaac, did you have something?
It was just that, but yeah, my understanding is we're limited by state statute from going above $1,000. And one of the items on our list is to maybe go to the legislature. And we're trying to remind ourselves, we try to remember, if you don't like the way something is, you can always go talk to whoever has power over that. So we could go to them and say, does this still make sense? Don't know how that'll go, but it's on our list of things.
Well, helping them get a sense of the history that we are dealing with, and that the task force is now managing as a part-time job that really shouldn't even have to exist, right? If there was enough teeth and enough threat there, then hopefully this dissuades a lot of this kind of discourages a lot of this kind of behavior. But I'm thrilled that you're trying as hard as you can to get that maximum penalty. I think that's very much needed.
I got a couple of questions.
Yes.
So for the offenses that we've had in the past, this grading, has it been, what has been the purpose of the grading that they've been cutting into the hillsides for? Has it been to like make a flat area to build, or has it been to extract material for sale?
It's been all over the board. There has been some to try to make property more developable. There has been stuff. Some of the reason that the grading is taking place is shocked me, and I still don't completely understand it, but it's just different things. And we need to go through each of the items, but there's no two that are the same. They're all different.
So what I'm wondering about is, if it is to make a level area more developable, more attractive for resale or something, then even $1,000 is no hindrance to that, right? And the other thing is, like, we're not requiring restoration, and it's really hard to restore a grade once it's been broken like that, right? Like, once you break the toe of a slope, you've created all sorts of problems.
So this fine also, right now, we're still working with them to do restoration. But you're right, once you scar the mountain, it's over 100 years plus before you completely clean up the scar. However, several of these, and we have several more that are complying, that they're gonna go back and fill in material, reseed it, and over time, it'll be less and less obvious that there was a disturbance. And on top of that, in the future, we'll be able to have $1,000 fine as opposed to a $25 fine. So people still should break the law and excavate because they feel the numbers too low. But like Isaac said, if we get the legislature to allow us to do a big number, we could do one.
Yeah.
This is where we're going to do.
But we are able to require them to do the rehabilitation and restoration.
Yes, we're going through that process. It's a little more cumbersome. Usually, from a public works standpoint, we have a developer with a bond, older money to go do it. These are violators that haven't posted a bond, haven't done it, and went out and did work. So we're going through a little more arduous process again to do it. But I believe in each case, we will get them to do it. It's just government wheels sometimes grind a little bit slowly, and it takes a while to get everybody's attention to do the work they're supposed to do.
Would it perhaps be easier if, say, for one of these violators, the city did the work and sent them a bill for it?
We could, but
Or
eventually, if
sued them for-
somebody goes through bankruptcy, or there's potential of losing the city's money. But obviously, if the city budgeted money and said, go fix something, we would go fix something. And
Yeah.
send somebody a bill, and then have bill collection and try to turn that. So I'm not against that. We just haven't entertained that. At this point, we're solely trying to put on the backs of the violators and have it come to the council or the mayor to say, hey, we'd like to get some upfront funds and do these things.
Right. Maybe this is prejudicial of me, but I'm inclined to think that if they're already violators, and if they were intentional violators, they might not be as cooperative in doing the rehabilitation as we would like.
That's a good assumption.
Okay.
Very accurate.
All right. If this is as good as we can do, then we do it. And I like Mr. Paxman's suggestion that we try to get more robust tools at the state level. Thank you.
Okay. So you'll see this back probably in 2 to 4 weeks or something, a regular city council meeting.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 4, a discussion regarding gateway standards. This will be presented by Jansen Tusher. Tusher.
That's okay.
Jansen
Yeah,
Tusher.
yeah, it's a tough one.
I need to write my names phonetically so that I am.
Well, it's especially difficult because I've known a few others with the same spelling, but they too.
Yeah, there's two questions. We think we're better than that.
Yeah, okay.
All right, well,
Was it a family feud?
Yeah, it was back at us. Yeah.
all right, well, let's hear our discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. So several years back, the city council asked for a gateways plan, and it took a little bit. But we're here now, and this is kind of what we proposed. I'll go through kind of quickly what the plan entails. Here's kind of the timeline. So the city council funded a gateways plan back in August of 2021. And it took until about end of April for us actually to get this underway. And we started with the technical working group that had former planners. We have representatives from the Provo Mall, from Riverwoods Mall, developers, from the Planning Commission, from City Council, from Public Works, just to get a bunch of different stakeholders and their voices in this process. We had follow-up meetings. We even met with the TMAC. We have sent drafts out to our technical working group, went to Planning Commission, and here we are now. So the goals of the gateway standards, there's really two goals. One is to identify what gateways that we deem are important right now, and to give them kind of priorities and themes, which we'll talk about in just a second. And then second is to recommend this toolkit of standards. And there are these 6 specific areas that we kind of make recommendations for. That can be, and this is kind of the unique thing about this plan, is what this plan does is it's not a catch-all for every single gateway, but instead what it calls for is that we will make eventually design corridors for each one of these gateways that is proposed. And then what we can do is we can go in and we can codify the language using some of these standards, right? Because not all standards should apply to every single gateway. It doesn't make sense in a lot of them. And so it kind of is what we like to call it, is a toolkit of such. So here are the identified in the general plan are 12 gateways. We as staff have proposed one additional one at 3700 North. And so these are the gateways that we are primarily looking at. We understand that there are other gateways coming into the city, but these are the ones that not only is identified in the general plan, but ones that people are to look at first. Now, there's 2 unique things that that these gateway standards does. One is it provides a gateways tier, where we prioritize which gateways we think are the most important based off of daily traffic use, of development potential, of population in the area. So it goes from most important, which is tier 1, all the way down to tier 3. And that only really signifies the priorities. The second thing that we're proposing is one of the unique things that we can do with this plan is that we can keep some of the cultural and historical and industrial impact that have happened throughout the city by applying what we like to call these gateway themes. And now these are just some that we as city staff have identified. We are more than willing to kind of change depending on what has happened, but we thought it was a great idea for us to kind of, different areas of Provo are unique. What is in the south is different than what's in the north, and while there should be uniformity, we wanted to allow some flexibility to allow some of that individuality between gateways to stand. So a tier 1 would look something. Now the tier 1s we've identified as these 4. University Ave at the mouth of the canyon, University Avenue at I-15 heading north, and the Center Street heading both east and west. Now you can look. One of the things that was a big debate between the original concept from the city and then going to the technical working group was what the sign should look like. So all the signs, as you see, as we go through tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3, all kind of have the same basic look, but there are slight differences. So in this one, we kind of have the tilt angle that you would see at the airport. But we'll see that, and we'll talk about this later, is in tier 1, there are additional elements. For this one, there's like a trellis background with landscaping. Tier 2, here are the ones that we've identified as tier 2. You'll see in this sign, it's just straight across, but it still does have some landscaping as well. But it is very similar in its design to tier 1. Same thing with tier 3. In this case, we decided to showcase that again, it can be different. This kind of goes more with that airport slant that it has in there. Now there are only 2 tier 3s that we've identified, Geneva and 3700. Now the big bulk of the gateway plan, the gateway standards, I should say, are these specific 6 areas that we talk about. So the first one is obviously a big portion of this is the monument signs that we've been establishing. So there are some sign standards focusing on the differences between the 3 tiers will be required. We do talk about landscaping standards, and instead of actually prescribing standards, towards the end we actually provide an appendix. We'll talk to the Public Works and the City Forester. It was hard for us to create a list of here are the approved plants because of the different microclimates in every single one. So instead, what we decided to do is to provide a helpful guide that you can look at. Third, we came up with parking standards. What we'd like to see. This includes things like pedestrian walkways and safety. Fourth is building appearances and setbacks. Fifth, multimodal safety. Again, gets into the transportation, bike lanes and stuff like that. And last is streetscape standards. Kind of stuff to aesthetically make the gateways a little bit better. The third section in the plan is just about the current conditions of each of the 13 gateways, if you look through. And then the last is the applicability. So we identify what the technical working group identified as the top priorities, which we as staff agree with. The importance of funding, how we're actually going to apply these to design corridors, city code, development standards, and then last is maintenance. And then there's appendix. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay, first, we'd like to recognize that Mayor Michelle Capusi has joined us. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And now we will open this to questions from the council. All right, then I've got some questions. So sure. if it's my turn then. So looking at this, what I'm understanding about this plan is that it's like a plan for a plan.
Yes. So how we actually put this into, when we originally started looking at it and coming up with individual plans for each specific gateway, we were coming up with a plan that would have been several hundred pages long. Because each gateway, as we talked about, is unique. With its landscaping, with its parking, with its transportation needs. So instead, what we've done is we've come up with this toolkit that then we later can put, quote unquote, teeth into when we codify it. We can just pull from this plan for specific gateways. We'll pull, okay, we're going to pull a little bit from the multimodal one because it makes sense here. A little bit from the landscaping one. And then on the next one, we're going to pull in different areas, just to hopefully in the future make it easier to get these processes a little faster.
So it's like you've gotten all of the different elements that we can choose from that are appropriate for gateways. And then if we're going to work on the gateway, say at 3700 North, we will look at those elements and say we're going to take this, and this, and make the standard for this gateway.
Yes. So yes. Yeah.
Okay. So we will have to be pulling all this together and creating a standard for that gateway at some point in time. We did not do that yet.
No.
And the reason we didn't do that is because it would just be too many pages, because it seems like we're just kicking that down the road.
So the idea, I understand how it looks in it. So the idea was this to come up with a way for us to do them more quickly. I know it seems like it's taking longer because instead of tackling each one, what we wanted to do was actually come out with something that we could see if we're going in the right direction if city council likes this. And then the follow-up of actually doing a design corridor at 3700 North is then a lot faster because we don't have to write all the codes and stuff that we want. We can just pull in.
Right, because we've agreed on all of the elements already.
Yes.
Okay.
Or, I don't know.
Oh, yes, please.
So when this started out, I think we were all considering this, or thinking about this like another neighborhood plan, a master plan kind of document. As we started digging into it, working on it, it occurred to us that this document made more sense to be more akin to the downtown streetscape standards than a master plan. So what we thought would be most useful to people trying to do these things would be enough commonality that no matter what sign you see, it's pretty quickly recognizable as a Provo gateway. It has similar fonts, the similar color schemes, things like that make it pretty recognizable as what it is, but still allow enough flexibility for the developer to reflect the specific site where it's going. North University is very different from South State Street, right? So to reflect that. As far as the design corridors come along, that allows us to get into ordinance, which is now just a plan. But these don't have to wait for that to happen. We're expecting the North University one to happen sooner rather than later. And although North University has a design corridor to it, that's now over 20 years old and probably needs to be revisited. We don't need to wait for that to happen for somebody to go ahead and install one of these according to these general parameters. Does that make sense? Is that heading in the right direction? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so the idea is we've created this so that when somebody wants to do a development in these gateways, we can say, yes, we would love for you to do that, but while you're doing it, you're also going to put up this monument sign to our city. And you're going to make sure it has this kind of look and feel because you, as your business, are welcoming everyone into our city.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to, but we as a city will not be putting up any of these signs.
There may be some cases where we are. There may be cases where it's development's already taken place. We're not going to wait around for redevelopment. So there may be cases where we will do that, and we would like to use some of the scooter money that is earmarked for wayfinding and consider this to be part of wayfinding. So we would like to do it in some places.
But then this would guide us too,
That's right.
right? Because it would say based on which corridor it is you're talking about, whether you're tier 1, 2, or 3. If the sign's got this big, it's got to have this element behind it, the landscaping, those kinds of things would guide us as well.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing, right now we are having the trail redone along University Avenue. But if this plan were already done then, we could have incorporated the sign into that because that goes through part of our.
Exactly.
Okay. Mr. Handley.
Yeah, so I feel like Shannon Ellsworth and Bill Fillmore were the two counselors who are maybe the most passionate about this topic. So I'm a little sad that Shannon is here online. Oh, okay. Why don't we hear from Shannon?
Oh, yes, let's.
I have a couple of questions, maybe.
Shannon, I can't see your hand. I'm relying on staff here, but you're up. As soon as we can hear.
This was very much a gateway that was a point on the map. And there was some direction in there about 100 feet from each gateway. And in my mind, I was thinking that gateways were corridors, not specific, hyper-specific locations. So can someone explain to me what the spectrum or the scope of those design guidelines are?
Yes, hopefully I think we just heard that latter end of your question. So the idea was each gateway is just a specific area. This goes into part of the complication of actually doing each one right now is how big should each gateway be? Because they're just identified in the general plan, but it doesn't give any specific lengths. The one at Center Street here from Center Street to 500, that's a pretty easy one to get. Oh, that should be a gateway. What the plan allows is when we actually create these to be a design corridor, we can then determine how long these gateways should be or these design corridors should be. So then it allows again for that individual approach of, you know, here's the gateway that should be, you know, several city blocks versus one that's, you know, as that was Bill was saying that there's all development around it. We really are just focusing on this one area sign, so it's going to be relatively small. And so that's the plan, kind of just that flexibility when we put it into the design folders. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Maybe I was just expecting more definition in terms of the size or the scope of the corridor. So I went back and watched the meetings from 2021, and really great refresher. I sent the links to the council if folks can watch that. But I had said in that meeting in, I think, summer 2021, when we were funding this, that it would be preferable to focus on corridors instead of spots, right? Because we're trying to kind of clean up and improve and beautify and make attractive the South State Street corridor, and doing that with just a spot isn't enough. And that's something we discussed as well in the what did we call them? The stakeholder meeting, or the committee that was put together, was we don't just want to put lipstick on a pig with a sign. We wanted to improve corridors. So any definition or specificity that could be added to that, I think would be really helpful, because yeah, there's still some ambiguity in my mind. The other question that came to mind when I was watching the old meetings was the council funded 3 plans together: the Gateways plan, the Hillside and Canyons plan, and then the River and Lakeshore plan. And then the funding has changed quite a bit. So the council specifically funded those 3 plans, but this was done internally, is my understanding. So how did we justify that process, and when did that come back to the council for approval?
I don't know if I can speak directly to, I wasn't there when the funding was given. I do know that the 2 other plans, the Hillside and the Rivers of Lakeshore, have been done, required a little bit more technical expertise. I think talking about it in group, and I feel like you can answer this a little bit better, is more of the funding went for those because they were a little bit more technical. In addition, with some of the funding, we did do a citywide survey with some of that data actually coming and going into the plan as well. So some of that money is here, but it's not being there during the time. I can't necessarily speak to.
Okay, I think it's great to communicate that along the way. Am I missing some audio?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I guess back to the funding, I just wish that had been communicated better in the last 2 years, because we specifically funded consultants for 3 plans, and then that was changed, and I don't know if that was communicated or if I just forgot that. So those are kind of my 2 priorities, is like making sure that we're communicating on the funding. If you go back and watch those meetings, the council was really specific and the proposals were really specific. And then also on the scope, if it was all up to me, I wish that we weren't focusing on 13 spots. I wish we were focusing on, 5 or 6 corridors. And I'm not picking my favorite corridors. I'm just saying I wish there was more specificity and less ambiguity.
Okay, first we'll hear from Mr. Caproni and then George Hanley.
So I don't know if staff ever went back to city council and got some kind of majority approval that staff was doing this in-house instead of the consultant. I thought the point was to get the plan done, and that's what we were been trying to do. At least 3 times, the most recent being yesterday, staff's been asked to account for the $300,000 for these plans. And all 3 times we reported to the council where that funding is, how much is left. There is certainly money left that we have talked several times to you about coming back to the council. It's still in the account wherever it got put. It hasn't been spent. So we've tried to be very responsible in not only how the money is spent, but getting the job done. The last one is that South Bay Street already has a design corridor, which is adopted as ordinance. If South State Street Design Corridor is falling short, let's amend that design corridor. That's something we can do pretty expeditiously as ordinance and get something that's binding on making that better. So I have.
Well, this might be related to that and to Shannon's concerns. I am much less interested in making sure that all actual physical gateway points into the city meet a very high level standard or a uniform standard, although I think it's probably a nice thing to have signs wherever possible. But when we had this discussion, I was thinking of and I thought we were sort of focused on the major corridor, the major gateways, so sort of North University, South State Street, Center Street, and maybe a fourth one. So I was similar to Shannon. I had like maybe 4 or 5 in my head that would be, you know, maybe we would go back and look at, does this have a design corridor? Is that design corridor up to date? What else do we want to add to it? So that we had sort of a comprehensive and more uniform approach to those major ones. Because it seems like the minor ones are pretty small by comparison, right? And they're not, a part of it was also sort of when people enter the city, and they, especially as non-locals, right? They're more likely to be entering into these major gateways rather than, you know, through, I don't know, I don't have the map, and so I'm not remembering where all the access points are. But I guess that would be my suggestion, is that if we went with your recommendation, I like the tiering, right? So if we say, okay, let's look at tier 1, maybe if we go back and look at that, we can get your recommendations about whether or not University Avenue, 4800 North, University Parkway, State Street, and Center Street need significant corridor work in addition to what you're proposing. I don't really have a sense of what's going to save us the most paper or digital pages in terms of bloating a code or making it more efficient. I'll leave that to staff to figure out. But if there's a way we could look at those first tier and make those the priority for now, with the rest of the recommendations you've got for the smaller ones to be looked at a later point, that seems like maybe that's consistent with what we were expecting and what we had proposed, you know, 2 years ago. So I don't know if that's requiring as a way of asking for a lot more work, but I don't know I don't really have a clear sense of what you need from us at this point. That you're just trying to tell us, hey, this is what we've sketched out so far, and are you looking for, this is the right direction, this is not the right direction?
This input is exactly what we're looking for. So is what you're describing more work? Yes. Is it manageable? And can we do it? Yes. So I think doing what you just described, prioritizing the top 4 or 5 and expanding those to be more corridor specific than site specific. Yes, I think we can do those things.
And so would this be the kind of thing where we've got something like the State Street corridor already? We would look at that particular code that we already have and use these standard suggestions to amend that code and update it? Is that the kind of thing? And that way we would be adopting a specific standard in code for that specific area? Yeah, and for that exact example, South State is probably the easiest because that's the most recent one we've written and probably will require less tweaking than some of the others that are 20 years old. Okay. Yeah. Do all of these major gateways already have some sort of a corridor design standard? No. No, there's not one on State Street. There's not one on University Parkway. Okay. And how do you anticipate this process would work with our anticipated re-examination of our entire zoning code.
Yeah, this would be completely independent of that. So I assume you're asking wrapping new design corridors into that ordinance. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like, I'm wondering if, this is not as specific as I think the council that requested was envisioning. They were wanting more of the specific things. But maybe this guideline thing is better so that once we get our code cleaned up, then we can impose this on that instead of codifying a lot of things that we then have to streamline in the future. Okay. Mr. Sanders, Council Policy Analyst.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that this plan is scheduled for the council meeting in 2 weeks. So if there's no council majority motion action language taken today, it'll come to you guys in 2 weeks as it was written in your packets. So if there's any changes or direction you would like to give, today would be a great time to give it.
Mr. Shipley.
I just concur that and again, it's hard when 2 years ago, we think we're saying something and then 2 years later it can become a little bit different. But I guess I would concur with what Mr. Hanley said, that I thought we were talking about the three main. I mean, even in my mind, I can't even come up with 4 or 5 different main ones. I thought it was West Center, South State, and North University.
Can we go to the slide that shows the first tier 1 locations? No, another one. Wasn't there one that, here we go.
So it does say in the plan that the tier 1s should be the priority and should be completed first.
Are these the locations that you were thinking of?
Well, South State would be, and it sounds like we have a something in ordinance for state, the design corridor ordinance, but again, without respect to that, and I didn't even know that existed. When we were first talking about this, in my mind, this was planning for those three, the 3 big ones that I mentioned, and I guess, and part of it's just that the South State and the West Provo are the for lack of a better way to describe it, they're kind of the eyesore entrances, and anything we can do to kind of just make the aesthetic in both places as good as we possibly can. I think that was my thought, coming into this plan. And then just to speak to something else that Shannon mentioned, Ms. Ellsworth mentioned, to whether or not it's in-house or I felt like planning has come to us a couple different times and said, hey, if we have expertise and if we have bandwidth in-house, we're going to do it to save money. And I'm fully supportive of that. So I don't need you to come back and get from it. If we have bandwidth and expertise, I want us to be able to do that in-house. And I'm grateful, that we tried to do that the best we can on this one. As far as scope, if taking these 2 or 3 main entrances and really creating a robust standard for those corridors, if that takes, external planning, then I'm supportive of that as well. But I'd love for us to go down that road without it if we can.
So one thing I hear you saying is to add South State Street to this list right here.
I think it's tier 1. I don't have the perspective of this working group. I assume that the working group got together and said, hey, where are the most critical places, and that's how it got, prioritized. But again, I'm just going off of what my initial understanding was, and again, it was limited. I didn't know how we were going to go through this process, but that was my thought process when we started.
Let's look at the tier 2 slide. I think it should be the next one. So we've got the State Street at Provo Springville. That's the one you're thinking of.
Right.
Are there any other ones on that you think should be a tier 1? Yeah.
Not for me.
All right. So it sounds like that may be a change, and we may entertain a motion on that later. I just wanted to clarify one more thing before we go into moving and shaking. And that is that this plan is kind of like phase 1. It's the big plan level. And it sounds like Councilor Ellsworth and maybe Councilor Hanley kind of wanted the next step going forward, which was more specific standards set using this phase one. So my question is, are we comfortable going ahead and adopting this as it is, just changing, a couple more things over to tier one, and then maybe setting a timeline or priority for moving on to that next phase? Apply these standards to a corridor and get those more specific things that we were hoping for.
Well, maybe that's a question for you. I'm talking to Bill Pepperoni first. Yeah, do you feel like that's one way to do it, or is it a preferable way to do it, or is it better to say, okay, well, you could take a longer time and come back with this same thing, maybe tiers adjusted, but that you fleshed out more of the tier one?
I would suggest adding the state to tier one, and then I would suggest the advantage to doing what Rachel just suggested is that, if we have somebody coming in immediately, like North University, it would be nice to have this adopted to some degree where we can say, this is what you need to follow. So I see value in getting something adopted sooner rather than later. But I would also qualify that as I'm comfortable doing that if we can, as a staff, bring something back to you pretty quickly, bring phase two back to you pretty quickly.
Can I just ask, like, the perspective for setting tier one, tier two, tier three, was it like what we thought was the amount of traffic? I'm trying to think of other ways that you guys might have prioritized it other than what I thought.
So we worked we worked with Public Works and they provided us with the annual average daily traffic for each of them.
Yeah, okay.
We looked at redevelopment, development potential for all of them, demographic data as well. So there is some reason behind which ones we still want to.
So we're just gonna leapfrog over that reason and move State Street up, I think is what may happen there.
That's fine.
Just because, it is one of the branches going into the city that, it's not duplicated with the other ways coming in. Any more council discussion?
So just a caution where some of these places we may be able to go in as a city and install a sign. I'm not confident that as a city, we're going to be able to go in and install corridor landscaping and improvements. That's a much bigger undertaking, much more expensive undertaking.
Yeah. I guess the last question I have is, we adopt this plan, but we still haven't codified anything. So when we have a developer coming to us, we can say, well, look at this plan, but this is not yet code that you're required to follow. These are just happy suggestions.
Well, that's the same with any general plan document.
Yeah.
And most developers will follow what the general plan document says. It's helpful when it's in code like our corridor plans are. It's always helpful to have it in code rather than a suggestion. But it's rare for us to have a developer push back and say, yeah, I understand your general plan says that, but I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Okay, so this gives us the strength to negotiate with those developers to get these kinds of things installed in these areas,
yeah,
even without putting it in code right now.
But to your point about prioritizing and doing signage and corridors and things like that, I think I would love to have a council discussion with the full council about prioritizing where funding might go outside of development, right? So where are we going to take internal funds and try to do some work in some of these areas? Maybe it's leftover money that we didn't use in the plan, something like that. But I think that's kind of next. So I'm not as worried about that. As long as it doesn't preclude us from having that discussion after, I think it's fine to have some a general working document to work with on all these corridors, and then go to the next step, which is there are some of these corridors that we're not going to have redevelopment, we're not going to have a developer come and offer any, kind of help on these anytime soon. Do we put a priority enough on this to put city money behind it to try to make it look nice?
Yeah, I think you're right, but please be careful. Keep in mind that the initial installation is probably not the biggest expense. It's the ongoing. Right.
That makes sense.
All right. So as Mr. Sanders says, unless we do a motion to amend this, this is what will be coming back to us for a vote in 2 weeks. So do we have a motion to make a change? Perhaps moving something from tier 2 to tier 1.
Yeah, yeah. I'll move that we just move the State Street and Provo Springville to tier 1.
And adopt the plan as it is without any other changes?
Not that I have it yet,
Okay,
for now.
is that motion clear for the record?
Can we
Thank you.
add though that we, in light of what we just discussed about fleshing out the tier 1, do we need some language to help staff know what our expectations are in the near future about
Well,
tier 1?
It seems that we could do that as a second motion for instruction to do after this plan is
Okay,
adopted.
I'll second Mr. Shipley's motion, or did that already get seconded?
That did not get seconded, so you are it. Okay, so the motion is seconded by George Handley. Is there any discussion on the motion? And is Shannon raising her hand or anything? We still have her?
Yeah, we got her. She's not raising her hand.
Okay, good. Just wanted to check in on her.
Okay.
All right. Seeing no council discussion, we will take a vote on the motion to adopt or to instruct that number 6 be added to tier 1 before it comes back to the council for a vote. So, Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Handley.
Yes.
Rachel Whipple is yes. Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
Shannon Ellsworth.
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to make another motion.
Just a second. I've got to announce the vote there. So that was 5 in favor with excused. Councilors Fillmore and Councilor McKay were excused. Now,
You're
Mr.
good at
Handley.
this, yeah. I would like to make a motion that we instruct staff to prioritize tier 1 as, let me think about how this language should go, and you can let me know if it's adequate. To prepare tier 1 to by incorporating by examining our current design corridors for those areas and making any recommendations for changes to those design corridors so that it is a fully fleshed out design area that we can then use as a tool.
Okay.
I don't know how much time that you need for that. I don't know that we want to be, do we need to be specific about that, or should it?
I think all the tier 1 streets have got a design corridor already in our code. So it's a matter of amending those.
Seeing what needs
Right.
updating.
So basically the motion is to incorporate this planned design standards into the existing corridor standards that we have for these areas.
Yeah,
You're making any needed adjustments.
Yeah, you're saying as a council, bring that back as.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Ms. Ellsworth.
No, it was clarified. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay,
so we have George's motion. Is that clear for the record?
no.
Okay. George's motion. You want to restate that?
Is to instruct staff to come back with a tier 1 proposal that would compare this new gateways plan with current design corridor standards for those tier 1 areas and make recommendations for any updates and or changes to those standards.
All right, do we have a second? Mr. Shipley has seconded that. Yeah, so this is moving on to phase 2, as I have so artfully described it, but starting to implement this plan into parts of our code for these really high priority areas. Is there any council discussion on this motion? We've already discussed this. All right, we will go ahead and do our vote. Mr. Handley.
Yes.
Councilor Whipple will say yes. Mr. Shipley,
Yes.
Ms. Ellsworth,
Yes.
Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
Okay, that is 5 in favor and 2 excused, so that is unanimous. Do we have any more discussion on this matter? Yeah, we haven't let you go yet. Yes.
Yeah, it just sounded like we'd already kind of thought through funding for some of these signs. I just wonder what the working group or what staff had in mind for. I mean, obviously, where development and redevelopment can happen, we'd love for somebody to do that, but then the matter of funding it on an ongoing basis to keep it up and to make it stay nice. So what was planning's thought, what was staff's thought as far as how we fund this and where funding comes from?
So as Mr. Pepperoni said, some of it would come from the SCARE money that we're using. But we do have the opportunity this plan kind of talks about is an opportunity to partner with private entities who might be developing in a specific area where we could work with them in designing a sign. Maybe they undergo the maintenance. It's the number's hard with trying to come up with a specific number for staff, just with that it's changed the original number that we got when we got estimates, which are currently still correct. The maintenance has increased, and there of silicone signs, our estimate of what it might be has increased. That's something that we're still looking at, is exactly what of how much it would cost.
So for a sign like this in an area where we don't have any public property, where we don't have any city-owned property, do cities lease space or lease? I mean, I'm just trying to think, like, how do we get a sign on private property sometimes from a business owner? What is usually the arrangement?
North University is a good example where we've already been meeting with that developer and talking about an entrance sign on his property. And in that case, I think not only will the sign be put up primarily at their expense, but also the ongoing maintenance will be, it's right on their doorstep, on the property they own. So that's an easy way to handle this. Much more difficult is maybe South State Street, where
so you've got existing businesses, but how does business? Are there contractual things that some cities will enter in with business owners to, again, have like an easement basically, or a right to use?
yes, and it can vary drastically from one to the next. In the South State situation, I can see us having to do the maintenance, landscaping maintenance, even if we can get it on private property. I would hope we do it within the street right away, but if we can't, that's no private property. I think we're going to be saddled with the ongoing maintenance. And that's going to involve Parks Department, because they're the ones who do that type of work. And I've left that up to the mayor.
Yeah.
Do it for the Parks Department. That lines.
That's Bill's exactly right. It's the upkeep is where the money comes in, and then who's gonna take it, because someone's gotta own it, and it gets a little bit tricky.
It's not an easy lift.
Do we have an estimate for how much the maintenance is for each of these little spots?
Yeah, because we haven't identified the size of the area.
Yeah, I'm thinking too about the little 300 South University Parklet. So the Heart of Provo sign is now in the shop to get cleaned up and repaired because of vandalism. But that's a relatively small area. The city's paying to maintain and keep that up. These would be smaller, but maybe that could give us a way to estimate how much it could be.
Does the roundabout at 3rd South, 7th East for the, that was done during the Olympics, is that Parks and Rec?
Yes.
Why'd they change all the landscaping on that?
No, maybe. I'll ask Scott.
Okay.
But all of those, if you think about UVX, when they came in, I believe they UDOT committed to managing all those strips for a certain amount of time. That do you recall Scott wasn't aware that all of a sudden it was gonna turn over to Parks and Rec? They apparently in the contract it said somewhere they would manage all the park strips are all gorgeous and beautiful and you know where they all are. But then to a certain amount of times, I believe it was 2 years. At that point, it was turning over to the city. So then that was all a little bit of a surprise. So then Parks and Rec had to take all of these park strips of weeding and watering and maintenance. And it's just, I mean, think about it. It's a lot easier to mow a field than it is to weed a park strip on University Avenue and keep those transplants. A lot of things will die. And so just looking at this, a lot of it would depend on how much are you putting grass around it, or is it just only the monument? And on the monument, are you putting live greenery? I mean, a lot of, the lights, the watering, just all of that's going to come into play. And Scott's going to love this conversation. And he's going to say, give me 2 more FTEs.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do have comments in the plan about water, smart,
Yeah.
uses. So I think both for water and expense and time for maintenance, we don't want like a small little forest around a beautiful little sign that's going to be this precious little thing that's going to be a ridiculous amount of money and water.
Okay, you all seem driven out of the airport, the Provo airport. The airport did this, right? And it looks really good. And
that's easy to maintain.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's all just rocks around it, if I recall, but it is the sign and this mock-up. It doesn't have the pergola. Is that like a pergola behind it?
Yeah.
With greenery, it doesn't have
We're
any of
more
that.
characterized by rocks than we are by trees in Utah anyway, so we might as well make it rock centric.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to do another motion or anything? Are we good? All right. Thank you all for participating in the discussion. Thank you. I release you now. You may go. We're going to take a break because we enjoyed that discussion probably more than our timeline anticipated. Our break will be a little bit shorter than 15 minutes. So let's come back at 2:50. All right. All right, great, people.
Recording stopped.
our consortium because these home funds are to be used throughout Utah County. They decided, yes, that they wanted to provide emergency shelter for victims of domestic violence, human trafficking. And so we would like to propose amending the plan to allow for a non-congregate shelter, which will have the limitation of serving that population of persons experiencing homelessness and near homelessness. So the proposal is to reallocate $1,759,085 to the purpose of a non-congregate shelter for victims of domestic violence. Adjusting the other numbers to adjusting supportive services down to $400,000, tenant-based rental assistance to $2,599,643, nonprofit operating $128,623, and administration and planning $257,247. So in July, we opened applications for the areas that were approved by council, the supportive services, tenant-based rental assistance, and nonprofit operating. And after the presentations were heard by the consortium members, these are the funding allocation amounts that they would like to have approved, and the entities applying for those funding. Do you want me to read those out loud?
No.
Can you say what TBRA means?
Tenant-based rental assistance.
So if you go back to the previous slide, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. So the previous allocations that we approved are wiped out, and this is totally new, or this is on top of that? Maybe I didn't catch that.
No, things they were let's see. Okay. So everything in white is what was approved previously. And then moving numbers around, this is the new proposal. These are
so it's the same total?
Blue, it is the same total.
Okay.
So the amounts in blue are the new proposed amounts, shifting some numbers around.
So what lost? It looks like supportive services lost 600,000.
Yes, and then administration of planning and nonprofit operating.
What was supportive services?
So that's a lot of wraparound services. It can go for a meal or medical, transportation, job. I don't have the list in front of me. There's quite an extensive list that falls under supportive services. I'm happy to send that to council if that's something that you would all like to see. But it's basically giving those persons experiencing homelessness the tools to overcome those circumstances and be self-sufficient.
I guess the question for me is, do you feel like anything is suffering unduly because of this adjustment, or is this an improvement, or is it just simply, I mean, whenever you reprioritize funding, somebody's gonna lose out. I just don't have a sense of how much affected they're gonna be, but 600,000 seems like a lot to lose.
It is, and also we were able to, on the supportive services we had, from the requests that we had extra. So even though it was the 600,000 loss, even moving that, because we ended up moving some money even from supportive services that just wasn't asked for. So we moved that into tenant-based rental assistance to help more in that area when we, after we had the applications come in. And also, I feel like it's a bonus if we're able to provide those victims of domestic violence. Because if you look at the HOME-ARP plan, you'll see that there is a huge gap between the need and what's available to help those individuals. So it is necessary.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I don't have any qualms with the reasoning. I guess I just wanted to make sure that nobody was going to get so crushed by it that it was creating other problems. But the acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter, 1.7 million. Who's managing that one?
So, well, Provo will oversee the money because we do all the reporting to HUD.
Okay.
And then it will go to, if it's approved, then we will put that, put a notice for funding available out for that. And then the consortium will hear proposals for that.
Okay.
Also.
So that could be anywhere in Utah Valley.
Yes.
But that's the amount of money that we would then be in a position to share or allocate to a specific acquisition project.
Yes.
Okay.
So long as that project is specifically for victims of domestic violence.
And you mentioned human trafficking. Do we have any statistics on what numbers those look like? Or the domestic violence?
We don't. I don't. I know that we do have an organization that works specifically with those victims that has been that was involved in the HOME-ARP planning process. I could reach out to them if you'd like.
I don't know. That's just the first time I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's
talking about.
It's part of the same. So HUD calls them qualifying populations, and the qualifying population for that includes victims of human trafficking as well as victims of domestic violence.
Okay. Commissioner Winkle.
Yes.
Councilor Ellsworth, this question.
Okay, Councilor Ellsworth.
I don't have my hand up that I know of.
Okay. Do you have any comments while you're here?
Put it down.
No, but thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Lowering your hand.
I have a couple of questions. So do we believe that this 1.7 million is enough to acquire and develop a non-congregate shelter for this purpose?
Yes. And I say that kind of questioning. I have been working with Heather Hogue at the Continuum of Care to come up with the number. She is in touch with some nonprofits that work specifically. So she helped come up with that number that would be needed to make that happen. And I trust her knowledge. And if it's not enough to make it fully happen, it will be a significant amount to help them on their way.
Okay.
So.
How many people do we believe would be served by this type of thing? Like how many rooms would we be offering in a non-congregate shelter that's 1.7 million?
I believe it's about between 70 and 77.
Okay. Yeah, and as a non-congregate shelter, what would be the timeline that people could stay here? Is this like 1 month, 3 months, 6?
I think currently, I'm trying to think what a refuge does currently. They're the only domestic violence non-congregate shelter that we have right now. And you know what? I don't wanna say a number that isn't true. I can get that information for you though.
Yeah, because the lack of a non-congregate shelter has been a huge gap that we've learned about, certainly through our series of meetings on this. And we need it for this specific population, but we need it for a larger population as well.
Yes.
My only hesitation on this is that this would exclude so many people who desperately need it because they don't qualify for that specific group definition.
That's true. And we're hoping to help ease the burden of those others with the tenant-based rental assistance and get them in that way. And I know that it continues to be something that the Continuum of Care talks about and is actively working on, but
Yeah, that's true, because the more we spend on tenant rental assistance, that is so much more efficient. The money goes so much farther, keeping people in their houses than it does to prepare another facility that they can go to after they've lost a home, because they leave so many more resources at that point in time. All right. Do we have a sense already where this could be? Like, is there a property that Heather's got her eyes on?
Yes, there is a property.
All right.
Yes.
Good.
Things are in the works.
Wonderful.
So
this is the sort of thing that if we go ahead and approve it, we could see action in the next few months.
yes.
Wonderful. And do we need to worry about ongoing operating costs? Because it doesn't look like that's included in.
It is not. So this funding will not cover any operating costs for non-congregate shelters. So they would have to look elsewhere for that kind of funding. And I don't have a sense of where they would look for that. But that is something that would be discussed when we do the funding process.
And would this shelter likely be run by one of the organizations that we already partner with?
I imagine, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions?
Well, it was just related to your comment about domestic violence victims versus other populations that would need non-congregate housing as well. I mean, maybe if it's already selected or close to closing, if we get the funding, I don't know if it matters at this point, but if they found a location that had more space, for example, would the prerequisites for the funding still be allowed to be used if, for example, and maybe they don't do this sort of thing, do they ever mix housing? So they say, okay, first 3 floors are for.
No, not when it's victims of domestic violence.
So it has to be
No.
exclusively that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just wondering if there was some way to
Yeah.
kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah, but the tenant-based rental assistance is for all of the qualifying populations, and if you remember, all of the qualifying populations are those experiencing homelessness or on the cusp of experiencing homelessness.
Right.
So it's specifically for those people.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Hoban.
Okay, so just make sure I understand. Go back to the one where it's white and blue. So the council approved this
In white.
back in the day,
Yes,
and now you're asking, we're going to have to approve the one in blue.
yes.
Okay, and so basically who's making these recommendations specifically?
The consortium.
Okay,
board.
so the consortium shaved off of these things
Mhm.
and said, let's do this instead, right?
Yes.
And one of the things was adding a non-congregate shelter, basically, which is now the majority of the funds. Well, I guess the tenant-based rental assistance is the majority.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess how did we get from A to C? So, back 6 months ago, this was approved, and now we're here. What was the process, or why was the recommendation made to build a shelter now as opposed to using the funding in these other ways?
So my recommendation from my HUD representative, because this was new money and it was problematic getting everything approved by HUD, was to go back and do an amendment for a shelter at a later date because we were coming up on the deadline to get our plan approved. So because there was always that gap that concerned many people to serve the victims of domestic violence, it was always in my mind to come back and provide funding for a non-congregate shelter and move some money around. So it was just like how much and when to do it. So working with the continuum of care after we got our plan approved by HUD, was working with the continuum of care and then the consortium members that are other officials throughout Utah County to come up with the numbers. So part of the non-congregate shelter numbers is from that. And then moving some of the other money around came about when we had organizations actually apply for the funding. And then we saw that some funding was needed in more places than others, so we shifted that around as well, so we could come and present you with all of the proposed funding changes at one time.
So if I understand correctly, so back in March, when we approved this fund, this funding, you were thinking this is a placeholder funding.
Yes.
You're gonna wanna come back and approve a shelter.
Yes.
Did you just refresh my mind? Did we discuss a shelter in those meetings back in March?
No.
Okay, so that doesn't really make sense to me then. I guess if we approved funding, but you had in your mind you were gonna use the funding for something else, why was it not discussed at the time then?
Because these were because this is the amounts that were going before you that were gonna be put in front of for HUD. And I wasn't sure at the time, there was the idea of the shelter, it was an idea.
Okay. Do we have someone from the city that could comment like what their thoughts are on the shelter and if this is what they want to do with these funds?
Our city people appear to have left.
How convenient.
But I do
But
recall
in
this
general-
being kind of a placeholder thing. And that's part of the reason there was so much money that was put into administration and support services, because those were the flexible buckets. And so I'm just delighted that we actually got the information that we need. We can amend this to add a more concrete thing to help people. Because one of the criticisms that we've gotten is that we're spending money on all of this overhead instead of direct services. And so this really helps to correct that. I will say though, overhead is important. If you don't pay people to administer things, you don't have a program.
Right.
So what does the city think about this? Is this what the mayor and the administration wants to do with the funds?
I can't speak to that.
So who's asking us to approve it? The city? Or
The consortium, the home consortium.
Okay, so what does the city think?
But she can't answer that. She's not the city.
Okay, it seems like if we're gonna come and talk about approving millions of dollars of money, we should know what the city wants to do and if they support this or not.
But this doesn't necessarily, none of this money necessarily goes to Provo. We just.
No,
happen to
but
be the-
Provo wants to decide what to do with this money, right? It seems weird that nobody's here telling us what the city thinks. I just think that's odd.
we represent. the city.
Melissa does. So, I mean.
Melissa's telling us what the consortium thinks, but she literally
She's
just
our-
said, I don't
she's
know.
but she's our representative. I mean, I think we've given her accountability based on what HUD's priorities and what the consortium identifies as their priorities to represent that. Come back. I mean, I think one of the things you have to understand, it's difficult for us as elected officials to make a decision in a timely process. Sometimes it takes a long time. She's dealing with us and with all the other entities, cities in the county and HUD. And some of that just takes sequencing and process. So HUD said to them, we understand that you may want to do this non-congregate housing shelter opportunity, but because you don't have the information yet and you're quite close to the deadline for you to get your plan approved, go ahead and adopt your plan and amend it later on once you have all the details. So the consortium has been working through all these details in the meantime, and they've come back, and Melissa is representative of one of them for Provo City, saying, this is what we think the best use of those funds are, and here's how we think the allocation should break out.
Okay, so this is what Provo City would like to do with these funds.
Yeah, as far as my position on the consortium, yes.
All
But
right.
that's for us to ratify.
Yeah. And
Right, I'm just trying to understand if this is coming from the consortium or if the city is like, yeah, we really want to do this. This is what we want to do. And I'm not getting that sense. It was more so like, well, this is what the consortium recommended. So that doesn't make me feel real confident that this is what we're wanting to do with these funds, I guess. So.
All right. Well, the mayor has rejoined us.
Yeah,
Have you had a
and
chance to review this?
I read it in the packet
Okay.
a couple days ago, and so it's new to me as well. I just know Melissa's the professional and just trust where she's going with this and what she's doing. There's so many moving pieces right now with everything with HB 499 included on top of all of this, and never questioned her before, never been disappointed, so.
Okay.
And I would only say, Travis, we've had, multiple presentations about homelessness from multiple agencies, all of which pointed to the need for some sort of non-congregate shelters. So I've always had that as sort of a high priority, whether that's something that specifically happens in the city or somewhere in the county. I don't really have the strong feeling one way or the other about it, but knowing that that's been consistently identified as a kind of missing piece in the whole continuum of care, I'm glad to see that they're prioritizing this. I mean, from my point of view, this is the right shift. I was only I was just kind of curious about what the shift in funds was going to do to the other funding, but it sounds like it's not.
When will this come to the council for approval?
It's scheduled to come in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks. So Travis, we've got time to look into that and for the city administration to look at it and see if they have any reservations or happy endorsements or anything like that.
Let's talk about the money. How do you get the money? It's not from our general fund, right? This money that.
No,
it's from HUD.
Yeah.
And it was a one-time award that we got for the purposes of serving the homeless population, solely the purpose of serving the homeless population, or those near homeless. It cannot be used for anything else.
And is it for the countywide or only the city?
It's countywide.
Okay, so that's kind of where
Yes.
The refuge, which is the facility that provides this service, is overburdened now. Right?
Yes.
They need more space.
Yes.
They need more rooms. And that's what this is intended to serve.
Yeah. I think in the report, and I'm not 100% sure on the number, but I know it was well over 1,000 that were turned away from their services because they did not have the room for those people in the 2022 fiscal year.
And Refuge just got approval to build a second campus or facility
plus beds
in Orem, but this is not for that. This would be for a different thing, or with
it could be for that, or it could be for another entity that has something ready to go and that serves that population.
All right.
And we have a location earmarked or in mind, you said?
Yes.
In Provo?
No.
In Utah County somewhere?
It is in Utah County.
It sounds like you've got more questions on that.
Oh, I think it's just like process, kind of like,
Yeah.
and more so, is this what we want to do? And I wasn't getting confident, like, yeah, this is where we want to spend the money, but maybe I just misunderstood, I guess who was wagging the tail, the tail was wagging the dog, and I just wanted to make sure that we were all on board with it, that this is what we want to do. It's a significant change, so that's why.
It is.
From what we had approved prior and discussed prior, I guess, so. It just, wanted to understand better.
Well, is this one-time money?
Yes.
So we won't get this, I mean, we go out for grants again next year, but again, it'll come in, if we were to land one, it would come and have to be countywide use and all those things.
Yeah. Anything that comes through the home consortium is for all of Utah County.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. We have now gotten well over our time because this was unexpectedly riveting. Okay, but we're going to move on to item number 6. This is a discussion regarding zoning code, which is obviously my favorite topic in the world. And Michael Sanders, our policy analyst, will be presenting this. Michael, I'm sorry, we are 14 minutes late getting started on you.
Okay, don't worry. I've timed my presentation and it takes me 7 minutes and 53 seconds to say everything I need to say. So you guys will have plenty of time. Okay, so we last heard this item in August, and council staff was directed to work with the planners to come back with a more fleshed out plan, some recommendations, and some cost estimates about what the potential zoning rewriting would cost. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over with you what the decision points staff would like you to keep in mind during this presentation. Would be, do we want to keep or strike form-based code in the ITOT zone inside the scope of work? Do we want to proceed with the RFP process, and where do we want this funding to come from? Okay, so over the course of this presentation, we're just gonna quickly go over the August 1st meeting. We're gonna go over the scope of work. form-based code in general and in the ITODs, cost estimates, and the funding options. So during the August 1st meeting, Aaron Ardmore walked us through and demonstrated what a plan review looks like for staff. Long story short, it's pretty complicated. We also went over the proposed scope of work and got the okay from the council there. We got the planning staff went over some of their initial recommendations regarding the consolidation of some of the zones in Title 14, and we briefly touched on the funding options. So as it stands, the scope of work is largely the same from the last discussion we had, aside from some edits that I made to reflect the council and planning staff recommendations, which I will go over in a few slides. During the August 1st meeting, we were asked to identify what part of the scope could be completed by Provo City staff. So that's what we're going to go over right now. So Provo City staff said that they would be willing and able to go over the combination of the zones and also the consolidation of Title 14.34. And Aaron Ardmore has already done this. He's completed this task and is ready to hand off all of his recommendations and work over to the consultant so that they could incorporate it in the same style and writing as the final rewriting. Now, what the consultant will actually hopefully be doing, the consultant will work on moving the permitted uses and standards to a table format. They'll also work to clean up the code. Over the years, there have been many gaps, ambiguities, inconsistencies, and conflicts that have crept in to the code, and some of these we have actually become accustomed to. So the purpose of having the consultant do this was so the consultant can come over the code with a fresh set of eyes and bring us nice recommendations. And finally, the consultant will be tasked with bringing recommendations to help us achieve the 28 zoning related goals mentioned in the general plan. These goals are, they are in regards to the chapters on community identity, land use, housing, economic development, transportation, and open space and recreation. Because as it stands right now, many of these goals are unachievable with our current zoning regulations, and this zoning rewrite will empower the city to start to achieve the vision that's set forth by the general plan. It's kind of like giving us the key to unlock the toolbox. Okay, form-based code in the ITOD. So the impetus for this zoning rewrite stemmed from issue requests asking staff to look at form-based code. And during the research, it was found that in Utah, form-based code is not usually imposed citywide, but rather in targeted areas of the city. And if the council is still interested in form-based code, planning staff has recommended and would be supportive of implementing a form-based code in the ITOD zone. Earlier this month, the straw poll was sent to the council asking their feelings towards this idea in August, and out of the 4 councilors who participated, all of them indicated that they were generally supportive of the idea of form-based code in the ITOD. Councilor Hoban did reach out to me with a concern about form-based codes, that it may open the door for potential nuisance businesses next to residential areas, as form-based code normally promotes a mixed-use development pattern. And I looked into this for him, and just to answer this, I'll just read an excerpt from an article that I found from the Form-Based Code Institute, a step-by-step guide for communities. Quote, in conventional zoning districts are primarily denied by land use. Form-based codes emphasize the physical character of development, its form, and include the regulation of some land uses. Similar to conventional zoning, permitted and conditional or special uses are listed by district in most form-based codes. However, land uses may be regulated more broadly, with land use categories in lieu of long lists of specific permitted uses. Of course, form-based codes can also specify subtypes that are not allowed in certain locations, or would be subject to discretion toward review, such as businesses involving sale of alcohol or other things. Last, it is common for form-based codes to include requirements for the location of various uses within individual buildings. For example, permitted office or residential uses only on the upper story of the building. More to come on that. Okay, so just to get us oriented on the location of the ITOD zone, this is the ITOD zone is called Interim Transit Oriented Development Zone. It was established to provide interim zoning measures while more comprehensive transit-oriented development plans could be formulated in other key transportation locations within the city. Oop, let's go back. So there are 2 instances of ITOD zone in the city. The first one, in the neighborhood of 500 South and University Avenue. Notable developments there are the Startup Station, Mill Race, Carson's Corner, the Commuter Station, and Community Action Food Bank. And the second instance is more to the north by Riverview Way near University Parkway, with the 400 element apartments being one of the main features over there. Okay, so the next 2 slides we're going to go over are kind of diving more into what I talked about in the last slide about the being able to limit uses in form-based code. This is just some screenshots. Sorry, they're not super awesome. They're from Salt Lake City's code book from their form-based code districts. So basically, first you'll define the form of the building. For example, multifamily or storefront, row house, cottage. All of these types of forms kind of have their long list of specified like setback requirements and specific design standards that they're supposed to conform to. Then after you have that, then you may, if you choose, place limits on uses. So in Salt Lake City, they use a general land use to describe kind of what is permitted in their buildings. And kind of an interesting thing they have like a limit on commercial uses. They say, so in some of the districts in Salt Lake City, non-commercial uses are limited to the first 3 stories of the building. So that's just kind of an idea of some of the potential limits that you could put in form-based code. Overall, the idea of form-based code is not to be overly restrictive, but it is possible to restrict incompatible land uses and regulate those if that is a priority. Okay, next subject. Estimates. Okay, so Brandon Larson reached out to several consultants asking for a rough estimate of what a zoning rewrite would cost, and the cost widely varies, mostly due to the amount of public engagement. This first consultant estimate kind of gave us 3 different public engagement options, and I'm just going to go over the one that we recommend. So we're recommending the public engagement option 2. Council staff, planning staff, and the consultants themselves are all kind of on the same page in terms of public engagement. Hopefully during the update process, the development community, city personnel, planning commission, and city council will be engaged for feedback. As this is not a general or area plan, but a code update, we will recommend and rely more on the expertise of the technical experts. The consultants will be drafting code that reflects the goals and values set forth in the general plan, which had substantive resident engagement. Planning commission, neighborhood meetings, and council meetings will be the outlet for residents to comment on the proposed ordinance. And the updated scope of work, which was in your packet, reflects this recommendation. All the references to the community engagement by the consultant have been removed for this purpose. Okay, so assuming public engagement option number 2, so this is like not engaging with the residents at large, SOMAS estimates the cost of the zoning rewrite to be about $183,000. Brandon did reach out to another consultant. They put the estimate between $300,000 to $350,000. So overall, the estimate ranges anywhere between $200,000 to $350,000 for the zoning update, and firm costs obviously will depend on the RFP responses should the council decide to go through with the zoning update. And finally, there are 3 main options for funding this project: the legacy CIP fund, general fund balance, or inclusion in the FY25 budget, and they're listed in order of recommendation. And if you want me to explain more of the pros and cons of any of these, we can during the discussion. And I just want to put up the questions that we would like to have answered by the end of this discussion. So, yeah, thank you.
All right, that was 10 minutes and 27 seconds. Well done.
How did you do that instead?
going pretty fast.
All right. Thank you so much for coming back to us with that really useful information. Do we have council discussion on this?
Can you help me understand bullet point number 1 a little more clearly? What, since we're only talking about 2 zones, I know one of them is somewhat large. What difference does it make to keep or strike form-based code in the ITOT?
Right, so it was just a what kind of led us to this point was discussing form-based code in general. And we decided, we don't want to go for the form-based code in the city as a whole. So maybe let's look into a targeted area to place form-based code in. And so the council has asked for planning staff's recommendations. And planning staff came back and said, if the council is so interested in doing it, we believe that the best place to experiment with this would be in the ITOT. So I guess kind of the options on number 1 would be, do we want to still experiment with form-based code in the city? And if so, do we believe that the ITOT is the best place to go for it?
Okay, that's helpful. I guess I was misremembering. So what Brandon Larson did when he was he just reduced the number of, or not, was it Brandon? No, it was Aaron.
That was Aaron.
Aaron. What Aaron did was just reduce the number of zones.
Yes, he did perform the consolidation.
Yeah.
Or he had the draft.
So I think I was much more interested in form-based code maybe than others. I don't remember. I've just always thought it seemed like a really elegant solution to a lot of things. But so I'm strongly in favor of experimenting or implementing it in the ITOT. I think we should proceed with the RFP process. And I think the funding, I'm just answering for myself, if that's we're not, I'm not deciding for the council. It sounded like that.
You could formulate a motion with yours.
Yeah, I'm about ready to. So, but maybe where the funding comes from, I think I'm also inclined to go with the recommendation. But could you remind us again why there's 1.9 million in the legacy CIP fund?
Yes, because there was a small amount last time we spoke in August, but following there was a lot of money left over from the demolition of City Hall and got dumped back and reallocated it to the legacy CIP fund.
I'm perfectly happy taking it from there.
Does that current balance of the legacy CIP fund account for that money that we're going to be putting towards the fire station?
I don't know, John.
I don't think it does, because we took 500,000 for that, so I think it's 500, that less 500,000.
Okay. I have a quick question, and as you were talking with our planning people, did they not want us to explore form-based code in any other zone in the city? They wanted us to only look at it for ITOT?
I think that they were just kind of unsure about how big the scope that the council, I think, let's let Bill Pepperoni answer that.
That just seems like a safe way to put our toe in the water and test it.
Okay.
The ITOT zone up on the Parkway, it's just finishing development. So zoning there is going to be irrelevant for 50 or 75 years. There's still quite a bit that could take place around the front of our station. So it's just a pretty isolated, pretty safe area for us to try, and that's something that the city council might pursue.
Do we need to change the name of those zones? It doesn't seem to be in there anymore.
We've had that discussion.
We'll change the form-based code District 1.
I could never remember what the I stood for anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A very long year.
It's transportation.
One year.
Yes. Can we go back a couple of slides? There. Let's see. So.
Talking about public engagement?
Yes, so PE2 includes public engagement.
Yes.
And are we saying that public engagement has already been done through the survey for the general plan?
No, okay, so public engagement 1 would be the consultant will engage with these 2 groups of people. Public engagement 2 would be these groups of people plus the above.
Okay,
And public engagement would be everybody plus the residents as a whole. So just since this would be a code update rather than a large general plan, the consultants and the planning staff and also the council staff at large all we think that it would be best to kind of not involve the residents until the very end during the public comment period, because the residents did all of the recommendations and code updates that the consultant will bring will be reflective of the general plan, which the residents did engage in substantially.
okay. Any other comments? Does, oh, Mr. Schiffler.
Trying to get my mind around how to put it down with the cleaning code. I didn't have a sense of that before today, so just.
Oh, this is like half what I was thinking based on what they said before.
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
Have you?
Sounds like we can go to 350 if that makes you feel better.
Does
Yeah.
Shannon want to pipe in on anything? Is her hand up?
She's eyes with, oh, yes.
My hand is not up physically or virtually. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. I don't have access to the little thing to see you, so that's why I keep checking in because I don't want.
Thank you. No, I get it. Thanks for that.
All right.
I will make a motion that we, if you go back to the 3 points,
Yes.
that we keep FBC in ITOT and we proceed with the RFP process and we take the funding from CIP, legacy CIP.
That we prepare an appropriation for the waste.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I
Is
think
that-
that's a perfect comment.
Yes.
Just one question, is that, just to clarify, is that to include the draft scope of work that was included in the materials? For the RFP?
Oh yeah, I guess there would be a fourth question there would need to accept. The scope of work and public engagement option number 2.
Yes, that would be my motion.
Yeah. And to clarify, we would set out the RFP. We don't know what entity would win on that, but we do have estimates from 2 different groups right now that give us an idea of who would be responding to the RFP and what numbers they would be suggesting.
Did he say which fund he wanted the money from?
The legacy CIP fund. Okay, so do you have George's clear?
I'm good.
Okay, and do we have a second? Okay, I will second George's motion. And council discussion. Yes, Mr. Hoban.
Is this a pretty good priority for you guys? Like, you want to spend the money on this?
Yes, it's many years past priority.
Okay, seems like a lot of money, but. Okay. Thanks.
I will say that one of the reasons I went to law school was because as a neighborhood chair, I could not read the city code. Because it was that complicated and convoluted.
Well, if it hadn't been, then you wouldn't have gone to law school.
It's good that I went to
We need more lawyers. Let's keep it as is.
Yeah, exactly.
Very tough security to find that.
But the fact that the code is so difficult to read and it's duplicative and sometimes contradictory, and we've got those horrible 4-digit usage codes, it's a nightmare, and it's really difficult for citizens to know what's in the code, what we're supposed to be doing, what they're allowed to do with their property, what they're not allowed. And it takes substantial amount of staff time to help people understand what their property rights are within the city. And so this, I love as a way that we can actually make the laws more accessible to our citizens and the people who want to come and work here. So I'm all for this. Thank you. All right.
So my preference would be to not predetermine the funding source. So I would be supportive of the motion, but I don't know that I'm not supportive of using that funding source. I guess I'm just saying to myself, we don't have an RFP yet, so I don't know what that amount's going to be. I haven't heard city staff suggestions on what we might use that legacy CIP for, that we might be taking away from. So I guess I'm just anxious, like, let's do the RFP first, let's see what comes back, and then let's talk about funding sources after.
Would you like to amend George's motion?
Or we could just. I'm just explaining why I would vote no on and how it currently is.
Well, that's.
Well,
that's why
I
I'm
would say,
saying-
I would amend it to say with an inclination to use the legacy CIP fund, but with the understanding that we would have that discussion at the appropriate time.
Basically, what I'm hearing is that you're kind of signaling that it's the council's inclination to use the CIP book fund money, so that if the administration is planning on using that money, they should come to you sooner rather than later with a plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do need to like have some degree of confidence at this point that if we're asking for this to go forward, we're confident that we can fund it.
Right.
And that's all, I guess, what I would say in my motion.
How long is the RFP process for this? When would we be spending this money?
It would take us a month to get it out. We would probably give the consultants a month and a half to respond to it. We wouldn't start spending money until the first phase is completed, so we're looking at first quarter of next year. We start spending the money.
I guess I don't care what.
All right, so George has, sounds like offered to amend his motion. Do you want that amendment? Do we need to pursue that?
I think that was assumed. I guess it was
Okay.
probably assumed that we probably use legacy CIP, but we're not pre-deciding at that time.
Okay. So we're indicating that's what we want, but we are not locking that in. So that's George's amendment to his motion. I will second that. Okay, so we're still clear on that. And so now, is there any further discussion on the amended motion? All right, in that case, we will go ahead and take a vote. So, Mr. Handley,
Yes.
I, Rachel Whipple, will vote yes. Mr. Shipley,
Yes.
Ms. Ellsworth,
Yes.
Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
Okay, that is 5 in favor with the remaining 2 councilors being excused. All right. Nothing else on this topic?
No.
Thank you so much. Well done on your time. Okay, we'll go on to item number 7, a discussion regarding the dog problem. This will be presented by Allie McAbee, our council intern. Oh, this is a much more positive name.
Yes, that was on purpose. I think after all the research that I've done, I realize it's more of a people problem rather than a dog problem.
Amen.
So obviously this is about solutions to problems that the city has seen with dog owners. Specifically, there has been an increase in dog waste around the city, an increase of concern for dogs that are off leashes, as well as dogs at public events. So today we wanted to follow up with concerns that the council had from last time. So that would include city code definitions, penalties, and ordinances for public events that would potentially ban dogs from those events. And just a note, we reached out to animal control, and everything that is in this presentation is supported and was advocated by animal control. So to start off, we are going to talk about definitions. So there was kind of a misunderstanding. Last time it was assumed that there was not really specific definitions about service animals or emotional support animals in the code, but we looked again and they actually are very specific definitions, which is great. So for service animals, in the city code, it says that a service animal means a service animal with the meaning of 28 CFR 35.104 as amended. And then in the city code, if you were to click on the link of 28 CFR, it takes you to the federal regulation definitions, and that definition states that a service animal means any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of the individual with a disability, including a physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. Other species of animals, whether wild or domestic, trained or untrained, are not service animals for the purposes of this definition. The work or tasks performed by a service animal must be directly related to the individual's disability. The crime, deterrent effects of an animal's presence, and the provision of an emotional support, well-being, comfort, or companionship do not constitute work or tasks for the purposes of this definition. So this is really specific, and this definition, especially the one in the city code, like whatever the federal government says a service animal is what the city says a service animal is. So we think that this definition is perfect as is. And the city code definition for an emotional support animal is emotional support animal means animals that provide companionship, relieve loneliness, and help with depression, anxiety, and certain phobias, but do not have special training to perform tasks that assist with the disability. These do not qualify as service animals. So after understanding more about this in the city code, staff's recommendation is to leave these definitions as is. They're very similar to what other counties, states, and cities are using, and so we like them how they are. So the next thing that we'd like to talk about are penalties. And this is specifically penalties for dog waste and off-leash dogs. And currently there aren't really any specific penalties in the city code. The city code does mention that the justice court can deny a pet owner the right to own a pet for a year if they have too many violations within like a 12-month period. Animal control officers can issue a citation to pet owners, but it doesn't say when or how or what kind of citation. And then it says that you can impound, an animal control officer can impound an animal at any time. So these next few slides will discuss examples of cities that have more specific penalties. And we came up with 3 different kinds of recommendations for penalties for these issues. They're kind of based on like a soft, medium, and harsh range. So we wanted to talk about examples for off-leash penalties. So the more softer penalties are on this side. So Salt Lake City, your first offense is $25, your second offense is $50, your third offense is $100, and the fourth is $200. And then Moose Jaw, Canada has $40 to $60 per violation, and then Layton, Utah at one point had a $50 to $100 fine per violation. And then the middle section, that's like a medium penalty. Greenwich, Connecticut had $100 per violation, and Denver, Colorado has another $100 per violation. And then the other side is more like the harsher side of it. Charlotte, North Carolina, the first offense is $50, and then when you get to your 5th offense, it's up to $500 with permanent seizure of that animal. Chicago, it can range anywhere from $300 to $10,000 and potential jail time, which is interesting. And then Canada has a $365 violation for any time your dog is off leash in public areas. So with that,
just a moment. We have a question.
So obviously, if a dog were off leash and ended up chasing a kid or biting someone,
yes,
there are probably criminal penalties as well on top, that would go on top of something like this.
In the city code, there is a section called vicious animals, and an animal is considered vicious if it attacks or bites anyone, if it acts very aggressively. And in city code, if that animal is considered aggressive, then there's certain actions that are taken, including like criminal.
And that could be on leash or off leash, actually, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Does that includes attacking other animals, other pets?
I think so. I'd have to double check on that. I think overall with any sort of like aggressive behavior.
We've had a situation in my neighborhood where that.
It's scary. It's really, it's not good to have that sort of situation.
Roaming gangs of dogs attacking chickens.
Chickens.
It does. We've
No, it happens.
Yeah,
Like
dogs kill chickens, cats, tons of pets in the neighborhood.
It's definitely not a thing. Yeah, but I can double check in the code to make sure, is it like, if a dog attacks animals, to that is when we considered aggressive.
90% confidence in it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, and I believe in this case, I know in this case they've been cited. I think the problem was that after the citations, which kept piling up because incidents kept happening. They had too many dogs according to our code in the first place. But the real issue wasn't that we didn't have laws against this, it's that the citations just stacked up and the person kept being unable to control the dogs, and so the safety issue wasn't resolved.
Yeah.
Even though everyone understood that they had been issued citations, also everyone understood the dogs were still there and still creating problems. And so there is a question about sort of the rapidity with which an officer can act to shut down a problem. I didn't realize that we do have in the code a seizure, and I don't know if in this case they just hadn't gotten to that point where they felt like they could or should. But I think there was also an issue, as there might often be, where there's no place. I don't know I spoke to the officer who's working on this case, and he said that the animal shelters are full. But I said, well, what if you have like an absolute emergency? And he's like, well, then we make room, like, you know, that they can seize a dog, but there, I guess, is some hesitancy to do that for a variety of reasons, but one might be that there isn't sufficient space.
Yeah, that definitely is something to take into consideration. I also think, so on this slide, it does have staff's recommendations on specific penalties, and, you know, hopefully people who get to like the 5th offense, that's going to be the very few and far between. I think the city hopes, and I hope, that people will learn their lesson on the first offense. I don't know if that helps, but so for off-leash penalties, we kind of have soft, medium, and hard level penalties that we can adopt and adjust in any way. So the soft one, we kind of follow what Salt Lake City is doing, $25 for the first offense, $50 for the second, $100 for the third, $150 for the fourth, and then on the 5th offense, just seizure, like they just lose their right to own an animal or own a dog. And then the medium is a little more, $75 for the first, $100 for the second, $150 for the third offense, fourth for the 200, or $200 for the fourth offense, and then again, seizure of the animal. And then the hard one is $300 for the first offense, $400 for the second, $500 for the third, $600 for the fourth, and then seizure as well. So that's what we have for off-leash penalties. We wanted to talk about dog waste as well, especially because there's been a lot of concern for that.
Poor dog got caught on camera.
So Salt Lake City Salt Lake City has penalties for this. So if you're caught not picking up your dog waste, your first offense is $50. The second offense is $100, third offense is $200, and then they also, on your like subsequent offenses, Salt Lake City considers it criminal, which is really interesting. And then other examples range from other cities around the United States. New York City with a $250 fine. Washington D.C. can be anywhere from $150 to $2,000. Baltimore, Maryland is $100 to $1,000. Seattle is $54 to $109. So it really just varies across the United States. So here's again staff's recommendation: a soft, medium, and harsh level of penalties. $50 for the first offense, second for $100 for the second, $150 for the third, $200 for the fourth, and then seizure on the 5th. And then medium would just go up by $100. So you start at 100, go up to 200, 300, 400, and then seizure. And then hard offenses would be, you go up by 250. So 250 for the first, 500 for the second, $750 for the third offense, $1,000 for the fourth offense, and then seizure. So those are the ideas that we have for penalties that could be implemented into the code that are more specific, and hopefully maybe add a little bit more pressure to dog owners to be responsible for their pets.
So those are higher than a lot of our parking tickets.
Yeah.
That we give for people. Do we have any indication from animal control or anyone else how this would be enforced? Would they actually have somebody sitting near a trailhead where people leave poop and say, hey, it's $50?
Yeah, so animal control didn't say anything specific about that, but I would definitely be happy to ask them. And I did do research on this, like how do we enforce these penalties? And there are a few examples of cities around the United States where they've figured out when there's more dog waste during the day, and so they send patrol officers during those times of days to those places to like see who's not cleaning up after their dog. One city specifically found that dog waste increased before work and after work, and so they sent an officer out to those locations for 2 hours in the morning and then 2 hours after the work hours, and that helps like decrease the amount of dog waste over time. So I guess it would overall, with what I've researched and have heard from other cities, it does seem like there are officers who are either in disguise or are very much there, and they are focused on trying to find people who are not cleaning up after their dog. And I have other ideas as well that I can forward to you as well.
But other cities with these penalties have found a way to actually enforce on it. And like, do we have a sense of how effective these penalties are? How often they cite people?
So I know there was one, I believe it was Chicago, and once they started like finding people for dog waste, I think, or I think it might have been off-leash dogs, I can't remember. Like 1 year they recorded like 300 citations, and then over the next couple of years, I think like after 3 years, there was like, it went down to only like 100 citations. And so I have seen a few examples where the cities have said, we did this in this year, and by this year, we've actually like given out less citations. And it does seem like there is a decrease in dog waste or off-leash dogs. Okay. I haven't seen that for every city that I've researched into, but there are a few examples that I have seen that be the case.
And this is for dog waste on public or city-owned property?
Yes, yep.
So if they're pooping on, I don't know, the yard in front of a church, doesn't count.
I think
that's private property.
Right.
Or the school grounds.
I think what I've seen with a lot of cities is if, I think it references in our city code that if a dog like poops in property that does not belong to their owner, it is a violation of city code.
So if your neighbor keeps bringing their Great Dane over to your yard,
yes,
you could call in and say, hey, watch this guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, my parents had this exact problem where our neighbor's dog kept coming in our yard and like pooping, and like the neighbors would like be there watching their dog pooping in our yard. So my mom threatened to call animal control, and they stopped. They never let their dog poop in our yard ever again. So I think it does count. So I can move on if there aren't any other questions about penalties.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the next thing we wanted to talk about are ordinances for public events. Specifically, the council was interested in seeing if we can pass an ordinance that would ban dogs from public events, because there are a few concerns with public events and people bringing their dogs. And by the way, service animals are exempt from this. In all cases, all laws that I've seen, service dogs are the exception. And I also have included the example ordinances from cities in supporting documents, so you guys can refer to that as well. But the first couple of cities that I wanted to mention are Hobbs, New Mexico, Buffalo, New York, Lafayette, Colorado, and Riverside, California. And these are the reasons that they decided to pass ordinances that ban dogs from public events. It has safety concerns for animals attacking other people, especially children. They were worried about aggression between animals themselves. Especially in a lot of public events, there seems to be, a preparation of food or selling of food items, and so they worried about contamination of food. And as well as summer events where there's high temperatures and hot pavement that could actually be could have a negative impact on their pets. And I will say that from what I've heard from the council and from other people, there are similar concerns, especially with food contamination, safety concerns, dogs potentially attacking small children that are at the same level as them, as well as an increase in dog waste. So here are a few examples. So Hobbs, New Mexico, this ordinance, it prohibits animals within the areas of city-sponsored events. So not all public events, but events that the city puts on. And they said that they're not going to go up to everyone who has a dog and say, oh my gosh, like we're going to fine up to $500 and put you in jail. They will go to the people who have dogs and say, hey, you know what? We actually passed an ordinance that says you cannot bring your dog here. Like you need to, take your dog away. And like they'll just warn dog owners of it if they come to the event with their dog, but if it's like a persistent, if it's persistent behavior, that's when they will like send citations to the dog owners. Overall, just the city's not out to get people, but just help people understand that dogs don't belong in a lot of public spaces. So Buffalo, New York, they have an ordinance that says whether your dog is leashed or unleashed, you cannot bring it to any special event on city property. And special events includes entertainments, exhibitions, performances, and other events on municipal property that require a permit or permission of the city of Buffalo or the Buffalo Board of Education. So that would include school events. So the next few examples are Lafayette, Colorado, and Riverside, California. Similar to the other ones, Lafayette City Council approved a ban on animals at public events on city property. And this resolution only allowed for service animals, that's the exception. And then on their city website, it does have a list of specific city events that animals are prohibited from. And then Riverside, California, says that whether intentional or unintentional, no one can bring an animal to any special event. And the city has posted signage at these events saying that dogs are not allowed. So, yes.
Can I ask a question of the mayor? Have the police, I mean, do we have a problem with this in Provo when we have public events? Do we get a lot of complaints or?
I'm just thinking of the farmer's market, those of you that have been, there are dogs there. I don't know how many complaints we've had. I know, with our animal control, there's, I believe, 2 officers in our entire animal control. So enforcing this, I think it would have to be, I'd like to do strategizing an event and having, because it would take more than 2, right, to enforce an event. I know Scott and I have had this discussion a bunch of times, and we just feel like similar to the story, if we enforced with a heavier fee than the $25, it would only take a few times of enforcing at events or at parks or, you know, randomly picking, okay, we're going to enforce at 7 a.m. at Rock Canyon Park, because that's when we see a lot of dogs running around going to the bathroom and everyone acts like it's not their dog. We feel like if we were to get enough folks at that time and then just move around and hit the parks, the word would get out. As far as the trails go, like the White Trailhead, BYU owns that. If they would want to link arms and do a heavy enforcement on the White Trailhead, as far as we're concerned, I think we could do similar as far as our parks, our trails go up to Rock Canyon. Once you cross the Green Gate, you know, now you're on National Forest. So we would have capacity up to that point. It would just be a matter of managing it and strategizing. I don't know how many calls we receive in 911.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to know what you thought about all of that, what you just shared as well. But I mean, in terms of public events, you know, it's like part of me just wonders: if we were to adopt something that prohibited all dogs at public events, are we trying to solve a problem we don't have, or is this actually an issue as well? I mean, all the other issues.
Yeah.
With public safety that happen on trails and in parks, generally, I think are totally like we're way overdue for something. Right. But I don't know. I don't have a sense of like if we have the 4th of July events going on, lots of people bringing dogs, and are they running around without leashes? Or are people getting jumped on
at Freedom Days or at? I mean, I'm just thinking of our Pioneer Day celebration at Kiwanis Park. I didn't see, and I've gone every year, and I didn't see any dogs. The uptick in dogs since the Labradoodle was invented has been significant, though. There's a lot of people that bring their dogs out, but I haven't heard or seen, and maybe I'm just not paying attention.
I mean, I don't personally. Yeah, I mean, the idea of like if we're requiring that they're on leashes, that seems to me more important at a public event than whether or not dogs are allowed. I mean, I do know, and I have had this happen to me, I'm sure all of us have, you know, that a large dog on a leash can still knock someone over if the owner's not paying attention and, you know, create some problems, or there can be conflicts between dogs. But generally, if they're on leashes, the owners know how to manage them, fine. And I'd rather not say no dogs at a public event unless we have a pretty serious problem with that.
I would like to add on that. I know the reason why we've been talking about ordinances for public events. I think it comes a lot from Councilor McKay because she's gone to the Provo's farmers market a lot and she is really concerned with the amount of dog waste that is left behind at the Provo's farmers market, as well as she's also concerned with, you know, there's like really big dogs that are in the faces of small children and around food products. I know when I've been to the farmers market, there have been a few times where I've seen really big dogs who have like muzzles on their mouths. And that to me is a sign of a dog that could potentially, you know, whether or not they're muzzled, could potentially jump on someone and knock down someone. And so, and this is purely based on the Provo's farmers market. I don't have enough information on other events in Provo, but at least for the Provo's farmers market, there has been a lot of talk about certain things with like dog waste safety concerns. I will also say, I know in the city code, under the animal control section, it says that no dogs are allowed in spaces where food products are being sold or being prepared.
Oh.
And the farmers market, there's so many.
Farmers market right there, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and so that's just something else to take into consideration. So, yeah, yes.
So my question on, and again, just because I don't have reference to other events, but with farmers market, if the city were to say, okay, we ban, you know, dogs, or we're going to post and we're going to have a little bit of enforcement, do we somehow assume additional liability if something were to happen from a dog? If once we've made that our law, I mean, are we kind of in a weird way? Are we kind of keeping liability on the dog owner if we don't create some kind of code like this?
Yes, I think in the city code, I think what I remember reading is any damages that a dog causes, I think that falls back on the dog owner. But sorry.
I said normally, but
normally, yeah.
Let's say we pass something and say, okay, at farmers markets, there will be no dogs allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't enforce that.
You don't enforce it, sorry?
The city doesn't enforce it.
So the city created an expectation that this is a dog-free zone, but then they don't actually enforce it.
And if something happens, then who's liable?
So are we assuming liability in a way that's kind of weird, perverse?
Yeah, scary.
Yeah, I would say that my general answer would be no. I think it's fine. The danger would be if we set forth some kind of enforcement or expectation of this is how we are going to enforce this particular law and then fail to do that. Then we may invite some liability. But in general, if it's you can't have dogs and someone brings a dog contrary to law, the liability is going to be theirs. If we say that and say, here, these are the ways we're going to make sure that the law is obeyed, and then we do that deficiently, then we can have some liability.
Real quick, Councilor Whipple.
Yes.
And I'll put Gary on the spot.
Oh, no.
Sorry, Gary.
It's all right.
I think what we've seen in some other jurisdictions as well is that the way the code is written is that events held in the city, not specifically city events, but those who are holding, like the farmers market, a non-city event, the liability is on the event holder to enforce the provision so that events held within the city cannot have, in this case, dogs. I think would then further restrict that liability on the city.
I think if it depends. That's a legal answer. I think it depends on how you structure that. If it's a non-city event and we tell them this is the law and you have to enforce it, I think we're pretty safe. I mean, it's probably not good that I've done the litigation for a long time, because I would have one asterisk that, I mean, what does safe mean? People can sue you whether they have a real cause of action or not and cause you a bunch of headaches. Whether they would succeed, I think, under that scenario, I would say their chances of succeeding with the city as a defendant are low. So if we were to do this, I think the question becomes as a matter of policy, how do we approach enforcement cautiously to avoid those things?
It seems like we could get sued if we don't have a law, right?
All right, let's move on to the mayor.
Just a quick question, Gary, with that. So they have to have a permit, a city permit so when they sign and we give them that permit, they're saying they will obey our city laws
Yes.
and enforce them.
I think it probably would be helpful to have a specific check on the checklist, a box that says we acknowledge that we'll.
Yeah.
So we could add that to our permit process.
That would
You
give me
have
a lot
food
of-
stands, you do not have dogs.
Yes, it would give me a lot of ammunition to say this was,
Yeah.
this was a condition of their
Okay.
use of the city facility. They agreed that they were going to do it. If we get sued, we just point at the, yeah.
They will check the box aside.
I was just gonna make the comment as a follow-up to what you mentioned about, Ms. McKay, at the farmer's market. I probably went half a dozen times this last year, and I'm really glad that we allow dogs. I think it's awesome. But we are a little bit challenged by the space and the spacing and also the amount of people that are trying to go back and forth on a sidewalk. So so I went to Ogden's Farmers Market this summer, and they've got the width of a street for people to go up and down, right? And the booths are on the sides. And I wouldn't have any I wouldn't be challenged by a large dog trying to, you've got plenty of room to navigate. But we are trying to put a lot of people just on a very small space. And I think that does create it's a little bit intimidating. You've got large dogs coming both directions and having to interact with each other in addition to kids, just everybody in such a small space, I think is a challenge for it. And it's because it's been so successful that it's creating a little bit of a challenge for us.
My thought on that is the concerns are speculative. I mean, we don't at this point have any data, right? We don't have reports of bad interactions or any time the police have been called or things like that. And granted, if there are scuffles or interactions, most of those probably wouldn't even result in calling the police or animal control, right? So it would be hard to get data on that. But what the concerns are that I've heard are all hypotheticals. They're not, I actually saw a dog bite a child in a stroller, right? They don't even rise to the level of anecdotal information. So I think it would be premature to do something to restrict the animals at public events until we have that kind of data justification for it. And if we can't get that for our own city, then I think we could, by analogy, take it from other cities, saying, we saw these issues, we entered this law, these issues were solved. I would accept that, but I don't see that we've reached that level with this analysis yet either.
And just to add to that, I would think that if we are requiring leashes on public property, we are prohibiting animals or pets near food, and we are requiring people to clean up after their dogs. If we're enforcing on all three of those things, we may find that public events go perfectly smoothly. I'm just agreeing with you that I think we've already got three really good tools that we have only sort of loosely used at this point that we can firm up in our code and make more explicit, and then hopefully lots of like quick educational targeted police efforts at Rock Canyon or at different parks in the city or at public events like farmers market, so that we can see that quick reduction because we've sort of stimulated a transition of behavior. Because I think that's the biggest issue for Provo right now, is we're just not in this practice. I've alluded to this before, but you go to a lot of other cities where, and my daughter and son-in-law live in Denver. I think I've mentioned this. I've never seen so many dog owners in my life as I see in Denver. It's unbelievable. But they, there's signs on everybody's lawns. There's signs at the park. There's all kinds of a expectation that there's a certain way to train your animal and to keep your animal, keep other people safe with your animal. Even walking down the street, when two people are walking towards each other with dogs, they will typically cross the other side of the street. They won't even risk the dogs having those conflicts, or a baby with a stroller, which I was pushing this weekend. People just go around because they know that's the respectful safest way to handle it. So I think if we can get to that point, I think we're gonna find a lot of problems go way down.
Okay, so we're at our time on this. What else do you have for us, Abby?
That's it. It's just, whether you guys want to make a decision on penalties or things like that.
Specifically regarding penalties, I like where you're going with hey, if we have a higher penalty, then maybe it's more of a deterrent to people who let them off leash. But I wonder if we might do like a warning and then jump to a higher penalty. I don't know.
I think we always have, don't the officers always have the option to do a warning before they do a citation?
Yes, they have discretion. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just thinking from an educational standpoint, I feel bad if first time somebody was like, oh, I thought I could throw my ball at my dog here, and bam, they're hit with $100 penalty. It's like,
yeah,
it's pretty harsh. But.
Yeah, I think, especially when you're changing things to do lots of.
If there's officer discretion, and sometimes they might give a warning, and that's documented. And jumping to a higher
They're always going to find you though, Travis.
Yeah, no, I have a problem with my dog.
I would vote for the soft.
Shannon's dropped
off leash.
Shannon's dropped off to travel here.
I would vote for the soft off leash penalties. That's my preference. But I would sort of second what.
So soft stool or soft hard on the next one?
You know.
But just to echo what the mayor was saying, and maybe this, if you just consult with the officers, but if we do these educational campaigns, I think I would be in favor of, hey guys, we got a new policy. You're gonna get a $25 fine for an offense, a $50 fine for another one. But we're just giving you a flyer right now to tell you, here are the fines, and if we catch you again, we're gonna do this and see if we can make progress.
George is in favor of soft off-leash penalties. What is your thought on the poopiness? Yes, the dog waste penalties.
Dog waste penalties, I would also go with soft.
Also go with soft. All right, any other thoughts from people on that? Do we have
motions? Sorry.
Are the warnings documented? So if they're given a warning, it's documented, or is it just kind of like?
Yeah, I don't think I could say they are documented.
Okay.
No, what you could do is though, you could have an event where you go and you hand out a bunch of flyers to people who are.
I'm okay.
And then we announce, this is a new policy, Provo City policy. And this is going to be enforced starting August 1st, but for the month of July, we're handing out warnings, but after August, it's all.
I'll second George.
We haven't motioned it yet.
Okay.
But still, got a quick question first. So you said you've talked to animal control about these things.
Yes.
Did they have a preference on soft, medium, or hard for either of these penalties?
They didn't give any feedback on that, but I could ask them. I can ask them to read.
Okay, but they like the idea of a tiered thing?
Yes.
Okay.
The stricter penalty, like it's falling tier for penalties.
And Carrie, are these penalties within our rights to do?
Yes.
Okay. All right, now, do we have a motion?
I will make a motion that we adopt the soft penalties for dog waste and the soft penalties for leash.
And so we wouldn't be adopting those quite yet, but we would be directing staff to prepare an ordinance. Okay.
Thank you. That's what I meant.
All right. Do you have that motion clear? Thank you. Do we have a second for this motion? Okay, Councilor Hoban seconds that. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? All right, we've talked about dogs a lot. Let's go ahead and take a vote. Councilor Hoban.
Yes.
Councilor Handley.
Yes.
Councilor Whipple is yes. Councilor Shipley.
Yes.
Okay, that is 4 votes in
Look at us passing
favor.
For
that
us.
is unanimous. The other 3 councilors are all excused. Anything else?
Well, do we want to address the public events or?
Yes, do we want to address public events?
I don't know, because I agree with Shipley, like when I'm at something where it's tight quarters and there's big dogs, I naturally want to step in between the dog and my kids, because the dog's face is right at my kid's face, and you just never know, right? So that's, but then maybe at like the mayor does these awesome events of like at Rock Canyon where it's movies in the park and that's not so intimidating. So I'm kind of going back and forth on this. So I guess I would say maybe, I don't know what to say.
Help us understand what dogs around food preparation, because I can't, in my mind, that doesn't reconcile with what we already do at the park.
I think there was just a risk of contaminating the food. That's what it kind of sounds like.
I understand the reason for it. What is the rule?
In front of the table, behind the table? Yeah.
We are out of time. Okay. Like entirely out of time.
Bring that one back.
So let's put this back on to talk about public events, food contamination with dogs.
There's a state law that I think might apply.
Yeah, so we need to see what the state and our current law is, if there's like a perimeter or space the dogs cannot be within. Because it may be that we just mark off like one lane at the farmer's market where the food is and we're good. Yeah. All right. So
I'll just say for the record, I'm not in favor of imposing anything on public events until we see what these policies yield.
Okay. We don't need a motion for that. You guys have clear direction. Okay. We will move on to number 8. This is a presentation regarding the fiscal year 2023 budget carryover report. This will be presented by Andrea Wright, our accountant and budget analyst. Andrea, I'm so sorry that we used up your time.
No, I can make this super fast.
Thank you. You can make it fast. I don't know if we can.
I'll answer the questions and leave that in. So I know that you guys are all familiar with the carryover process. The departments submit their carryover request through July and August. Then August and September, finance complies to review the list and then see after that if there's any room for supplemental one-time supplemental requests. Then the mayor reviews it and we do any edits that are required and we just send it to you and the mayor approves it. We kind of broke it out a little bit different this year. We made a line that was just for per budget ordinance, so that would be something kind of messed up here are the easy lines we want to look at and actually discriminate. We also added a line to show the supplemental requests on the carryover list, so you can easily review those as well. This just kind of shows the budget ordinance authorization that was approved in June by the council. Here's just kind of a comparison to last year and how it splits out and how it differs. We actually are still able to go ahead and put money back into the employee recognition and the innovation fund. We're also sending money to the local government disaster fund as well. The reason it's higher this time for our carryover amount is mainly due to vehicle replacement. Also a late FY appropriation for the breathing apparatus to get that going. And then also the supplemental request that we were actually able to add to it equaled the $579,018, which was pretty awesome. We were able to cover that. Here's a list of all the stuff, the one-time supplemental requests that we were able to include in the carryover list. I don't know if you want to go through or we keep speed through. And then on the non-general fund operations, mostly the carryovers were from the budget ordinance, which included vehicle replacement, computer bank. The other larger amounts were related to ongoing jobs and costs that were self-explanatory. Any questions?
All right, that was pretty fast. Can you go back to a couple of those slides that had information on them?
Yes, those ones we can review.
Did you guys have questions? Shipley, we've got to rely on you for this.
No, I think we finally got this process really buttoned up. When I first came on the council, I feel like this was kind of a black box. We would just get a presentation that said, here's 1,000 different things that I mean, it was so busy that it was hard to differentiate. I think color coding helped. I was Dave Harding. And then I think, just parsing out a lot of the noise. There's a lot of noise with this that really isn't helpful. And so this is really good.
Thank you. We hope we know this time.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions about this? Thank you so much for doing this, and I want to echo Councilor Shipley's appreciation for making this relatively easy to digest. As easy to digest as it can be with this many numbers in different categories. Thank you so much.
You've been doing a great job. It doesn't look like this when it comes to me. It's just pages, drafts, pages. We walk through it together.
And I would just mention that Andrew was promoted a year or so ago into this position, and she did an amazing job helping us with the carryover, and we just appreciate her being able to utilize her talents and abilities, and she's doing great.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. The municipal council will consider a motion to close the meeting. A closed session has been requested. Utah Code Section 52-4-205 allows meetings to be closed for certain specified reasons. This is presented by Gary Milward, our Deputy City Attorney.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, under that statutes, the meeting can be closed to discuss the character or professional competency of an individual. My understanding is that there are multiple individuals, and that discussion needs to take place, so it would be appropriate for the council to entertain a motion to close this meeting.
I'll second.
All right. We will do a verbal roll call vote to close the meeting. Vice Chair Whipple, I vote yes. Councilor Handley,
Yes.
Councilor Hoban,
Yes.
Councilor Shipley.
Yes.
Okay, that is unanimous with the 4 present councilors voting to close the meeting. The 3 who are not present are excused.
Recording stop.